creatures are all and living things are all very similar in their DNA, so it's like it's really I'd love to talk to you about that more sometime, Jason. I didn't know about that. I think that's great that you did that. And then you actually remember, you actually have the gift of that time in India to have reached a state where now you can draw on that, like you can still remember it. It's still a big part of you. It didn't just go away. Wow, that's tremendous. Jeez. That is really something. Anyways, we'll talk. Yeah. Okay.
So let's bring down to the here and now moment.
Yeah.
And let's share the PowerPoint, and I'll open up the webcast, and everyone can. In fact, you could. Well, I'll get you to mute after we share PowerPoint, and then I'll start broadcasting.
Yeah. Let me just get the PowerPoint up.
I think Terry is.
So let's go. I've got to put this up to over here. We'll go to Polycom. Right. So wait a minute. I want PC in. Oh no, HDMI. I'll pick it. Okay, so first let me connect. This to my. And then we'll get that on the screen.
Hey Terry, how are you?
Okay, so here comes PowerPoint. And then, okay. Now,
So are you
just going to see.
are you committing for the two meetings next year? Yeah.
It's perfect for getting 50-50 split on the webcast there, Lon.
Good. Okay, I'm just pulling out here on the screen. Just a second.
I'm going to reconnect
Over here.
my connection's a little shoddy. 1 second. Yeah, I'll see you in a second.
Okay. Okay. Oh, there it is. Where did that go? Yeah, that's what I want. Okay. Disappeared for a second. Right, okay, good. So, okay. Great.
I forgot.
That's really nice.
I know you're just class, like, oh, there's my drawing. All right.
Wonderful.
Yeah, what I did is, in the future we can talk about this, that whenever someone does a PowerPoint, to deliver it in 16 by 9 widescreen. So what I did is, it was delivered in 4 by 3, which is a different format. But what I did is I just took a few minutes to adjust the slides so they're 16 by 9. That way what we get is the full screen, and on the live stream, we get it filling in the entire window as opposed to just a portion of the window. So, but it's simple, I can tell you about that. Okay, great.
You'll beat it. Oh my gosh. I look like I do.
Hey, Lon.
Yeah. Great.
You're good.
Okay,
I see the
so,
PowerPoint is looking great. I've opened the webcast, and you guys can want to just mute until you're ready to go live.
Yeah, sure. No, that's great. What I did is.
Make sure you unmute yourself.
Yeah. No, I'll mute in a second. I just, it's great because I took a few minutes in my office to just adjust some of the slides that were, when I adjusted PowerPoint to 16 by 9, some of the slides, the text was bleeding off the slide, and I adjusted them, and so they're all the slides will be good, and all the text will be within the frame, and in the future I'm going to have our our guests make sure that they do the adjusting themselves to 16 by 9. It's not a big deal. It's took me a few minutes, but anyways, so that's good. Okay.
Pretty.
Great. So I'll mute, and I'll see. So there's nothing else you need from me. I can mute.
Yeah, go ahead. I'll launch the chat as well, and I'll be watching the chat. Okay.
Okay. Great. Thanks.
Awesome. Thanks so much. Just make sure to unmute when you go live.
Yep. Yeah. Okay. Yep.
best practices, like it's really.
Just know that the microphones are on now, because we're just testing, so anything that's said in here is going out. But you guys, I've noticed, do like to talk, and you're not afraid of much, so just be careful. Any locker roomish language.
Yeah.
I haven't heard that yet.
Yes, my trip to Chicago is really
Just be aware.
No, it's okay. I just couldn't email you. I didn't email you.
thing, and then we're trying to.
What's it? If you email me, I'll email you. I've got received them. No problem.
I appreciate it, thank you.
How did you get a drink from?
Oh, yeah, this is you want it? Or no? Okay, all right. I don't know what's wrong with you.
Okay, so Sunday, just send me, I'm talking to my technical
Lon?
director.
You don't have a thing on it.
Okay, well, where are you? You need to log into the webcast. Okay.
I want to like lean forward.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
You wanna go? Okay.
You didn't bring a pen? Mine just died.
Because that's way. Okay, so Sunday, yeah, you just sent me a text. So we're good. Just
I was thinking about getting that one.
Okay, Sunday, thanks. We're just getting.
That ring.
Okay.
My mom keeps ordering like every other week.
Okay, good.
And go to that one.
You can have my paper.
Was not like, but I was like, oh, I don't like that. I didn't even know what he said until I.
No, I didn't think about it until I was driving here. The second I was
I
driving
was like,
here,
I watched the
like,
highlights and I saw him say
I
something.
feel like we talked about it, but I was like, we never discussed if we were gonna like pick it up or anything like that. And I was like,
Okay,
I
so
don't know, on the radio,
you said you could get it.
like, yeah, he dropped the F word. I'm like, oh.
So.
He's lucky he actually comes out.
Excellent.
Because I'm really good at
Yeah.
So they're going to last chase. Don't do salary.
That's good. Yeah, like when I saw that, I was like, okay, he's lucky the Blue Jays suspended him and the MLB didn't. I don't think they would. Like, a team's already made the decision.
And you're on his knee, right?
They're gonna hit him today. It's gonna be brutal. I'm going to the game next Saturday. My dad got tickets for sitting 200 level TD Comforts in. First row. Recline whole late. He's like, damn, those are seats. He's like, yeah.
Well, anytime you wanna get going, it looks like we're set.
Seats are like,
And the audio's good, and I've got people watching, and Jason, are you, you're there? At the bridge? So, we're good? Everyone there? Jason, you at, the bridge? He'll be back, I'm sure. Jason? Jason, are you there at the bridge? Hello?
I'm here, and all good to go.
Okay, great, thanks.
Go for it.
Yeah,
Is the
thanks.
sound on?
You're live to the world.
Yeah, we're live, we're good.
Okay.
So, go ahead.
Okay, so I'd like to welcome everyone to our MPAC Assessment Review Board, continuing professional development. It's been offered now for, I think, 3 years, but this year there are major updates that are going to be included. So we would like to say welcome, thank you for supporting Durham College, and we hope you enjoy. Our presenter, Drew Samuels, is a graduate of our graduate certificate program here, and a manager at MPAC, and a licensed paralegal. He still does hearings, even though he's in management, so I give you a lot of credit. And You might, some live, you can chat in the questions, or in-person people. There are positions open, it's no secret. They're on Indeed, but I don't know whether they've closed. but
Closing
I'll-
today, midnight.
Oh, okay. All right, Drew. So, thank you very much. And this is 1 hour professionalism, and it will be anywhere from 1.5 to 2 hours substantive. And confirmation of attendance certificates will be emailed out to all participants, but please give me a couple of weeks because there's a new system for confirming that people logged in. Okay, so without further ado, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you all for attending, and I guess online. Just as a FYI, for the people here at least, I like to have it a bit more interactive. Luckily, I know a few of you in here. So if you have a question, just speak up, and I believe we'll be stopping every 15 minutes or so to see if anyone online has any questions. So I'm hoping you enjoy. I pretty much broke down this presentation into 2 parts, trying to give you a little bit about what MPAC does and the assessment review board, what they hear. And we'll take a break, probably the midway point today, and then we'll go into the major updates Lori so eloquently referred to. So as we get settled in, I'm sure we'll be fine. We'll hit my slide.
Yep, sure.
The agenda of what I'll be speaking to in the first part of this CPD tonight. I'm going to go through and tell you what an assessment is, because there are people that own homes and still don't know what an assessment is. It's quite important. I'll talk a bit about the ARB and what they're mandated to do. We'll go into how MPAC approaches value, which is at a very high level, and we'll go into current value, and then I'll dig deeper into our system, and some case law will be littered throughout that part, and then we'll go into equity and provide some more cases. If my understanding is correct, you have all received the cases in some way, shape, or form. Quite dense, so hopefully I can break it down and tell you what the important parts of those cases are. So, we'll go to the next slide.
Okay.
These are the 2 most important parts, I think, of the Assessment Act, depending on who you ask. But before we get into nuts and bolts, let's talk about what an assessment is. So, every parcel of land in Ontario has an assessment on it from MPAC, the company I work at. And when I say that, don't think of a house or even a farm or a building. It doesn't matter what the parcel looks like. Legally, if it's a parcel, it has a value on it. Now, the reason why that's important is because every parcel of land, somehow, in some way, shape, or form, translates into tax. So, I'm going to use very, very, very easy examples. Let's say you have a $100,000 home, and you are in this, whatever municipality you're in, and they put a 1% tax rate on a residential home. It's quite simple. 500,000 times 1% tax rate equals $5,000 of assessment. It isn't always that easy, but let's just use that example for tonight's purposes. So the municipalities are really dependent on MPAC assessing things properly because they apply their tax rates to different properties, residential homes, commercial buildings, industrial buildings, farms, everything you could think of, Yorkdale Mall, CN Tower, a farm out in Cornwall, doesn't matter. So everything's assessed, and they need that to apply some sort of tax rate to get their taxes. Why that's important to some of you is because if you own any type of property, you probably don't like paying your taxes. Now, that doesn't mean necessarily that your assessment is wrong, but we all pay taxes, and that's why we have certain things municipally run, infrastructure, our school support system, of course, so on and so forth. The water we get from our taps, parks, and recs. So you're welcome. So in the Act, in particular, in Section 44, there are 2 parts, well, subsections, 3A and B. For those of you that attended CPDs in the past, whether it was me or someone else doing it, you would have focused a lot on the current value section, which is Section 44.3A. And this is not a quote from the Act, this is me summarizing. You basically, the board is mandated, because it says shall in the Act, to determine what current value is. And loosely spoken, in Section 1, it says, I'm not reading directly, it's the amount of money a person would pay a willing buyer and willing seller doing a transaction if it was unencumbered. And if there's a disagreement, once you file an appeal and you go to MPAC and we argue and we don't agree, you go to the board will first, in its first part test, have to do that. Find the current value of your property. Loosely spoken, doesn't matter what property you have, what would it transact for? Now, we pick a certain date in the year. Every 4 years, we do another reassessment. So we're in a reassessment period now. As of January 1st, 2016, we applied values to all the properties in Ontario. And that value translates to taxes for you for the next 4 years, 2017, 18, 19, and essentially 2020. I won't be spending too much time on current value today because I want to get into something a little more difficult. And when I say a little more, I mean a lot more difficult. And that's equity. And I'm going to go into a lot more detail later. But what the board's mandated to do as well in their second part test is to decide whether or not, after we found the current value of a property, if that's equitable among other properties that are similar to it within a certain vicinity. Now, that may have sounded complex. Some of you are thinking, yeah, that makes sense. But it's actually very, very, very difficult, because what makes it more difficult is the fact that you can only make an equity adjustment if it results in a reduction to a value. We're going to get more into it. So we'll hit the next slide and see when we work through this. So under Section 40 of the Act, it determines who has the onus. So think of something outside of assessment. When you go, hopefully you haven't got a traffic ticket, but if you go, the onus to prove that you are guilty of that offense, it lies with the prosecutor that you go and see that day. They will go first. They will try to go through all the elements. Should they be successful, it's now up to you as the person who's charged to prove to the judge that you are not guilty of that offense. Switching to something that MPAC does, the onus, as of 2009 forward, is on MPAC to prove that the value is correct. Now, the reason I bring this up is it's quite different. Think of other things you do in law. You bring an application or file a matter, you are saying something is wrong or someone has done you wrong or violated some way, you would have the burden to prove that someone has done something wrong or incorrect, so on and so forth. Since 2009, it's a little different, whereas the homeowner, or taxpayer I should say, files an appeal, and immediately the burden's on MPAC to prove that the appeal they filed is not valid, or if it is valid, we change the market value of the property. So it's a little different. Prior to 2009, it was very different. Whoever filed the appeal must prove that the assessment was incorrect or inequitable. So before I go further into correctness, I want to explain that an assessment, although the board has to do two things, and that prove the current value or the inequitableness of the property or the assessment, an assessment has much broader implications. So under Section 14 of the Act, I always call that section what an assessment is. And there are several things there. You have a classification of a property, so your home is residential, but you can imagine an industrial building is industrial. An office building would be commercial, farm would be farm, multi-residential, so on and so forth. You also have school support. You have the person's name. You have property details on your property. So any of those things can be appealed to the Assessment Review Board to get a correction if you are correct. But for now, we're just dealing with the 2 points, like I said. So dealing a bit with current value, what does correctness mean? So I'll go to the next slide and say the way you would determine correctness if you were to file an appeal on a property you own, you would have to use one of the three approaches. And I say have to because these three approaches to value are the recognized techniques in appraisal theory. And simply put, at a very high level, you have the sales comparison approach. So using a home, I have a home here, my neighbor's house is identical to mine. MPAC, you have me assessed at $1 million. It's sold for $500,000. And generally speaking, our homes are identical, so my home should be the same as that home sold for. So you're comparing sales in the market to yours. The way to do that is to pick other properties that are very similar to you or as similar as possible. For the income approach, that's used for certain properties like an office building or like a multi-residential building, where MPAC would believe, and many other people in the assessment world believe, that those properties are bought and sold based on their income earning potential. So you can imagine someone buying a multi-residential building with 100 tenants in various bedroom sizes, 1, 2, 3, and bachelor units. They would say, how much income does this property produce month to month, year to year? And what return on investment do I need? And there's a calculation for that I won't go into, but once you do that, you would end up with the value of the property, and that's typically how they're bought and sold. And to do that, we would look at financial statements, and we look at rent rolls to see what the property's earning. For the cost approach, it's quite simple. We're in Oshawa today, at least the people here present with us, think of something like GM. So GM, not really income being earned on that property, and you're not going to find a sale of that property anywhere, so you use the cost approach. What the cost approach says at a very high level is someone is going to pay the same cost it would take to reproduce that same structure, brand new, and then depreciate it. And if you've seen GM lately, it's probably depreciated a lot. However, that is the cost approach in a nutshell, and there are various things that go towards cost. You take the land value that the property is on, you have the cost of construction of that building, which MPAC has a vast record of, and you depreciate it over a certain amount of time, and that's pretty much what the building is worth. the parcel of land is worth. So let's go further. So here's a case that you guys should have if I've done my job correctly. And this was one of the first, or the first case that came out in a written format after 2009 taxation year, because again, things have changed. 2009 is when the onus was lying with MPAC. And what this case basically said is talking about the onus as it switched to MPAC. And what it's saying is that MPAC must produce a value that's reasonably correct. And if they've done so and proved that to the board, then the burden of proof switches, or the onus, switches to the taxpayer for them to prove that MPAC is either incorrect or the value is still inequitable. And that's what that's basically saying. So we don't have to be finitely correct. We just have to prove that on a balance of probabilities, we are correct. So to use another example, this is not criminal law where you're thinking of beyond a reasonable doubt. This is administrative law, so it's on a balance of probabilities. 50% plus 1. If you can prove that, it's up to the appellant to prove otherwise. Now I realize that I can't believe I got through 3 or 4 slides and we're 15 minutes in. I'll have to speed up a bit. Do we have any questions? So I can just stop here?
Not yet.
Perfect. Everyone's sleeping and that's a good thing. I'm okay for now. I'm okay for now.
I got a question for you, sorry.
We have a question in front, sorry.
Is there a time frame when the board has to basically prove your assessment from the time you file your appeal? Like, are they bound to do this within a time frame?
So are you speaking to scheduling? How quickly
Yes.
your matter be scheduled?
Yes.
I'll hit that in the second part because you guys are going to be quite surprised at how long it takes. But let's wait till the second half of the presentation if we could. That's
No problem.
Question here.
If you're using the cost approach to evaluate a property like General Motors, but then you still have to evaluate the land portion, do you use the sales comparison approach for the land portion as well?
Great question. Yes, is the answer to that. Yes. The reason you do it separately, and I won't go into too much detail, but if anyone knows anything about real estate, land doesn't depreciate. It stays the same, maybe the market changes, but generally speaking, when you're applying on obsolescence, in terms of depreciation, it doesn't. So you separate the two. And yes, you would find land sales to get for example, a rate per acre of the land, and that would be your land value, and then you'd have your cost approach for the structure itself. Absolutely. Good question. Speak faster just because I'm aware of the time and your time, but I'll still try to keep it at a good pace because you guys will fall asleep. So, next slide. So, on the last slide, we talked about MPAC having to prove that the value is reasonably correct. So, the age-old question in any type of law you're in is what is reasonable? What's a reasonable person? What are reasonable actions? So, in terms of assessment, what's reasonable? Well, for a long time, we've tried to approach that reasonableness with a range of value. So, think of it this way. You're trying to find properties. If you had a home, maybe a property is a little more superior to yours. It has granite and hardwood that you don't have. And there are some properties a little more inferior to yours. Maybe they have a smaller lot size or smaller square footage. And something in between would be yours. If it's within that range, it's reasonable. Now, you don't want a wide range. In my line of work, I can probably point to any property in the province and give you a range of 1 million to 3 million. You want a pretty tight range, and if you've done that, it's said to be that you are reasonable in your value, or the valuation analyst is reasonable within its value. If that value you're prescribing or even reducing on appeal falls in that range, then therefore you should be reasonably correct. And again, the burden would shift to the taxpayer. Slide, please. So, as a practical point here, when if any of you choose to work for MPAC or the dark side, you will have to know how to go to the board and present your evidence. This is much like many of the paralegals have already learned. You have to frame your evidence. So I won't read it in detail, but you guys can see it. Hopefully on the screen online they can see it. This is just something I made up. You're telling a story. This is your theory of the case. You have to make sure as a paralegal, whatever your theory of the case is, it matches your witness. So at MPAC we have valuation staff and assessors that assess properties. Those people, men and women, will become my witnesses at court. I would go through the question and answer period, through examination in chief and cross-examination. And their story has to make sense. Them finding superior and inferior properties, or finding the right amount of leases to formulate an income approach, or alternatively finding sales for land and making sure their cost approach makes sense in terms of the depreciation, and make sure that it's a story you can tell the board member that they would agree to, or at least make your story better than the other person, and you'll probably be successful. Slide, please. So standard of proof, sticking with the concept of going to court and what you're preparing for. This case, if I'm correct, Supreme Court of candidate case. It's the leading case really when it comes to standard of proof and burden of proof. I believe it's a criminal case. If I'm short, those online are looking right now. Don't get mad at me if I'm wrong. But it's talking about balance of probabilities, things that we've all learned before, and it has to be clear and convincing based on cogent evidence. So you can't just go in there as MPAC and say, you know what, this is what we did to all the properties. We assessed all the properties just like yours using the same model, so therefore you're correct. Not quite good enough. So you really have to dig in, and from a mass appraisal view, you really have to narrow yourself down to fee simple. And we'll go into that for those of you who don't know what I mean. So, adjustments. I want to talk about this a bit, of course, that's why it's on the slide. You can have a home, and someone else in the crowd can have a home. And from the outside, they can look very, very similar. But maybe on the inside, you have very different details in terms of its finishes, for example. Or, maybe not to the naked eye, you can have two homes, and maybe they're down the street from each other, but the lot size is different. One has a 55-foot frontage, which is quite nice if anyone lives in a house like that or more. And if you live in Toronto, you have 12-foot frontage because your house is $2 million and that's the house you get. So often when we go to the board, it's not very simple. When you're in some rural areas, maybe you can have a little more homogeneity in terms of like subdivisions. But many times, homes aren't exactly that simple to be connected. So we have many adjustments that we would prove or disprove within the model. However, MPAC uses a computer system that looks at many variables. So it's very seldom that you see two homes, they're exactly the same, but one has just a different size frontage. Usually, one has a larger frontage, the other one has more bathrooms, another one has nicer finishes, and another one is in a different location. So you're comparing Toronto to Belleville, you're probably going to get a little bit of variance there. Often you find homes that are similar sizes in different areas having different values because of those differences. So MPAC generally states, and it's appraisal theory that states, is that 85% of your assessment is based on 5 factors. And I'm going to try to remember them all right now. One factor would be the area of, let's say, your home, the actual structure, the lot size, so the plot of land you have, the location, real estate, location, location, location. Makes a big difference if you're in Toronto versus Gravenhurst, right? The quality of construction is a large one because, again, if you have marble countertops compared to something else, if you have nice pot lights and hardwood compared to something else, your value is going to change. So all of those things really, really make a difference. The other 15% is other nuisances. So let's say, for example, your house fronts onto Simcoe. Simcoe Street, for those of you not in Oshawa. It's a very busy street in Oshawa, compared to having a similar home, but you're on a cul-de-sac, quiet neighborhood. You might have a variance in value because the busy street, a lot of people do not want to live on a busy street. So you would probably have a negative adjustment downwards because sales would show that people would prefer a cul-de-sac home. It isn't always that straightforward. I'll give you another example. Let's say you are a young family and you have a little baby and you want a home right next to a school because you know that, you know what, from K to 6 or K to 8, you're going to watch your kid go and drink their coffee in the morning, and you're going to watch them play in the field and get their first fight and have their first kiss, and they're going to come home for lunch and it's going to be perfect. Conversely, you've had a lot of kids. You're a little older, you've had 6 kids, you're done with the kids. You might not want that home right next to the school because you're going to hear the kids playing every day, and you're going to see the kids kissing every day, and you're going to see the kids fighting every day. So sometimes what is an amenity to someone is actually a nuisance to someone else. So we should keep that in mind as well. So, computer-assisted mass appraisal, or what we're going to call today multiple regression analysis. It's a mass appraisal tool that MPAC uses. So let's be clear. MPAC is the assessing authority for all of Ontario. We provide assessments to 444 municipalities, the last time I counted. And there are over 5 million parcels of land in Ontario. There isn't a few men and women going out with a clipboard assessing every property, because we'd have to do reassessments every 50 years if that was the case. So we collect data through many different means, through doing inspections, through sales investigations, through the nosy neighbor, which is always the best one. They call you and tell you, hey, I have the same assessment as my neighbor, but they got a pool in their backyard. Thank you very much, nosy neighbor. We'll go pick that up. And your assessment's staying the same and theirs will go up, so you're not getting a real break anyways. So all this data we collect goes into our system. In our system, we have a statistical team at MPAC that just runs models all day long. And when I buy models, they collect all this data and they find out what data is significant to property values. So for example, maybe if you were in somewhere in the Southwest, the fact that a home has 4 bedrooms versus 3 is a big difference. And maybe some of you think that right now. But if you're in the GTA, bedrooms do not go into our model, it's insignificant. What people like in the GTA is just a home that has good size. So the bedroom statistic would be put into the model and it would be significant in somewhere in an area that's maybe more rural. And in the city, as you know, if you've been in the GTA and watched the news, we don't even know what captures value these days. We're just guessing. We're throwing darts at a dartboard right now. But it's not a simple component-based process. There's a lot of stuff that goes into it, and I'll tell you some more cases that come up, I think, on the next few slides, where people are really trying to dig into MPAC's mass appraisal model. And we're very protective of it, it's proprietary. And what we actually say is that it's not really the model that is on trial, it's actually the value. So for example, it's not how MPAC came to the value, it's what the final value is. So I remember doing a case once, I've done it twice actually, but very disgruntled taxpayer and their representative, and they didn't like the story we were telling. I was framing my evidence, and in my closing, facetiously I told the member, technically MPAC could have had a dartboard and just taken 5 million darts, I don't know where we get that from, and we could have just kept throwing darts and assessed every property in Ontario. And by just a matter of probability, some would be right and many would be far off. But the ones that were right, they could technically not like our process that we just threw darts. But if the value is correct, that's all that matters. So the test on appeal is really, is that value correct, not how MPAC got to the value. So let's go to the next slide. And here's another case, Kogan and MPAC. So I know this case very well. This particular gentleman was very, very upset at MPAC because he believed that his value was atrociously wrong. And he did a lot of requests. MPAC is a publicly funded organization. I should have told you more about it, but we'll do that later. And you can do freedom of information requests, so you can get information that we wouldn't disclose to the public for a fee. And there's a whole department that would decide if and when you get certain information. So he did that. He asked MPAC for certain materials on motion. And although we tried to comply with everything we could have, eventually we put our foot down and said, okay, hold on a second. He actually wanted our entire model. So he wanted us to produce the model, which is, I wouldn't know if he had the computer to handle the type of model we have, but he wanted that to say, I want your whole model to see what's going on and to pick it apart and to tell you why your assessments are wrong. So on motion, we contested it when he raised that motion. And I have a short sentence here. Simply put, this is the board member, a quote from the case. The model relied upon by MPAC is an evaluation tool and not a requirement of the Assessment Act. So again, it essentially confirms what I was saying before, that we don't have to go through the intricacies of the model and the variables and all the criteria that goes into it and all the leases and all the sales and all the owners' names and all the bedroom sizes to figure out if your value is correct. In most scenarios, you are able to look at other assessments or other sales to determine where your property should lie in terms of reasonability. Does anyone have a question about that right now?
Are there any questions? No, we're good. Okay.
This is good. This is good. I must be doing a good job. So we'll go to the next slide. So we're going to get into equity. And this is going to be tough. And I'll tell you, I'm going to explain this to you guys now, and there's some of you guys who are going to think this doesn't make any sense. There are some of you that are going to say, yeah, I get that, and you don't. And there will be some of you, like a fraction of you, that maybe get it and are going to have trouble applying this right now. So I'm just forewarning everyone, it's a very, very difficult concept we're going to go into. So before we go to the next slide, let me give you an example. I'm going to use Lori right now. Lori's a bus driver, okay? And, hey, don't laugh. Hey, make it
No stress.
So Lori's the bus driver. She's driving the bus, and she's not the sharpest tool in there. And bus fare is supposed to be $1. It actually just changed. It's $1 for bus fare. Lori doesn't really pay attention to that. She doesn't really check emails. So that day she's driving her bus along, and everyone that comes on, I'm going to use you group of people here. You guys all come on, just 90 cents, 90 cents, 90 cents, 90 cents. Everyone pays 90 cents, 90 cents for everyone. And she stops to get a coffee, and while she's getting a coffee, she checks her phone, And she realizes, oh, an email went out last night and bus fare actually changed to $1. She's like, shoot, gotta correct that. I've been shortchanging my company all this time. She gets back to her bus and starts driving. And then the next bus stop, lowly old Drew is there. And I get on and she says, yeah, that'll be $1. And I say, hold on a second. Maybe you're right, but I don't know. Let me just take a quick survey. So before I pay, I question all you guys. Say, sorry, if you don't mind, what did you pay? 90 cents. Oh, and you? 90 cents. 90 cents? 90 cents. Wait a minute. That's not fair, or that's not equitable. Everyone else was supposed to pay $1, but they paid 90 cents. So in my mind, to be equitable or fair, I should pay 90 cents too. Now, in terms of the bus driver, they're going to say, no, you got to pay $1. However, in terms of assessment, an equitable value would actually be 90 cents. So although we've determined, based on the law or the rule or regulation, that $1 is actually my current value, I'm paying 90 cents because similar people in the vicinity are paying 90 cents. Now let's stop there and let's think of a different example. Lori's driving the bus and she charges all of you guys $1.10. Takes her potty, it wasn't a potty break, sorry, it was a coffee break, excuse me. She takes her coffee break and sees an email and she's like, should have had a V8, it's actually $1. Gets on the bus, charges me $1, same scenario, and I say, hold on a second, I saw you yesterday and you did this to me. What did you guys pay? Oh, $1.10. Oh, everyone paid $1.10. Now technically, the correct value is $1. And to be equitable and fair, I should pay $1.10 because everyone else paid $1.10. But if you remember the slides way back when, the second slide I showed you, or the third slide, what I said was that you can only make that adjustment. You can go back to the first slide. It's going to have a big red section down here.
Review time.
There you go. Only the adjustment can only be made if it results in a reduction. Okay, so to be fair, technically I should pay more. But if you're using this section of the Act, then I can still pay $1, and that would still be seen as fair because the equity provision, which is remedial in nature, is stating that it can only be a reduction. That's the simplest example I can give you, and I don't have another one, so please, any questions, do not ask me to give you another example. I prepped this like all night. No, we'll go back just a slide that says equity. So, as I've said that, we're going to go into several different scenarios and cases that are going to kind of deviate from what I've said, because like I said, equity is the hardest provision in the entire assessment world, I would say. There's probably equity in another thing called economic obsolescence that's dumbfound most of the community and the assessment bar. And ARB members are human too, so if we're all confused by it, you'll see the decisions, and from courts, they're a little confused by it too, with all due respect. It's a very hard provision, but generally speaking, you kind of understand what's happening. Now, before I go forward, I'm going to talk about fairness, because as I was telling you about equity, I talked about fairness. And fairness is an interesting thing, because it seems fair that if you guys were all paying $1.10, then I should pay $1.10. So I don't want you to always think of equity as fairness. I'll give you another example that's a little more abstract. Lori and I walk into a home, and as we're walking in, I'm before her, I'm not a gentleman, and as we turn the corner, there's an orange. And I see it and I pick it up. I'm saying, I'm going to eat this orange. And Lori says, hey, wait a minute. I want the orange. If I asked you guys all right now what's fair, perhaps some of you would say, well, what's fair is you saw it first. Finders keepers kind of thing. Hey, it's your orange, you saw it first, she didn't see it, too bad, so that. Some of you may say, why don't you split the orange in half? That's fair. You guys both get a half, you guys both get what you want. That could be fair to some people. Someone would say, well, who's hungrier? Who ate last? Well, Drew, you ate lunch and Lori didn't have lunch. So, although you saw it first, why would you even split it? Give her the orange, she's hungrier. It can be argued, but in my opinion, and I can keep going, those three things would be fair. No matter which one you choose, depending on your slant, they'd be fair. Equity isn't always fair because of the provision that you can only make a reduction. Because essentially, some people will be paying higher than than their true values. But on appeal, you can never get a higher value. You always only get your value or lower in terms of equity. And I got the owners. And I think it's fair. So we'll go to the next slide. I'll take you guys through some cases. Oh, I'm going backwards. Still going backwards.
Okay. There's equity.
Yep, go for it. Are we going forward? Feel like going backwards?
backwards.
It's back. Okay.
Ah, here we go. So a bit of interpretation here. I didn't put all these sections in, so I'm telling you things verbally. The assessing corporation, so in all legislation refers to assessing corporation, MPAC is technically a new entity. It's only a creature as of 1998, I want to say. 1998. Before that, we were OPAC, Ontario Property Assessing Corporation, for 2 years. And before that, we were just with the Ministry of Finance. We're all in there in one big bunch. And they kicked us out a couple years after. So, what the legislation says is that the assessing corporation must assess all properties at its current value. And MPAC has the onus to prove the correct current value. So, dealing with any other aspect of assessment outside of current value, what MPAC believes and what the courts have held is that the onus of other issues rests with the appellant, the taxpayer, the representative. Because all MPAC is bound to do is assess properties at its current value, and at court, provide enough proof of the balance of probability that the current value is correct. So equity, to prove a property is inequitable, rests with the appellant. So the interpretation of the Act specifies that assessing corporation's burden is only with respect to correctness of current value. And that's why we take that. Now, I have a little question here. Who proceeds first at a hearing? I'm hoping that you guys went to great paralegal schools, and what you've learned is that the person who speaks first at a hearing is the person with the onus. So again, going to traffic, the prosecutor goes first. I'm going to get to the question in 1 second. In landlord-tenant matters, whoever files the application, they're the one going first to prove that something has been done to them or they want a remedy of some sort. So a question I have before I get into all this is, what if the issue at court is not current value? Who would go first, and does the procedure change? Now, before I get into that, I have a question here. Oh, no, we're good. So, many times at many hearings, because the board is mandated to do at least two things, current value and, again, equity, MPAC goes first. It's a strange world we live in. We didn't file the application, but we go first. And that's fine. I've been to hearings where the only issue is classification of a property, or in this case, I'll use equity. And I have asked the board that since the issue is very narrow, that I don't want to go first, we'll have the appellant go first. Some board members don't like that as a rule of practice, because as a publicly funded organization, it is at least seen that we have a lot more resources than some other people, and a lot of times that is true. So sometimes you may have to go first, even on an issue you don't even have the onus to prove, or disprove for that matter. So just as a rule of practice, I would argue that if it's not current value in terms of an issue on appeal, that the municipality, who's also a party to these appeals, or the taxpayer or representatives, should go first, and MPAC should respond, because we don't have the burden for that, and technically they should satisfy and discharge their burden before it shifts to MPAC to prove otherwise. Uniformity. And this is why it gets a little more tricky. We're peeling back the layers of this onion, so don't cry yet. We're not there. But uniformity is not necessarily equity. So when I was going through the bus example, it kind of seemed like I was making everyone uniform. And that kind of makes sense. But let's think of it a different way. What if you were a very large home, and I was comparing you for equity purposes to a much smaller home? Could you still prove that based on those two assessments, that both properties are assessed equitably? It's my suggestion to you today that you could, and I'll get into that a little more. So it doesn't necessarily mean that when you're looking at equity, you have to look at exact similar homes to find out if those things are equitable. In many situations around the province, you don't have that much inventory to make a determination that that's clear-cut. If you are assessing a property like a large bank tower downtown Toronto, for those of you watching other places, you're probably not going to find similar properties to that bank tower that have sold anywhere else. So you might have to take your frame of reference from other types of properties. All you're really looking for is if the property is in the same general nature, character, or function, which is, some of you are saying, what the hell does general nature, character, function mean? Well, maybe you can compare that large bank tower downtown, that only really 5 exist, and compare it to other larger office buildings that maybe have sold, or maybe just comparing their assessments to see if they're kind of in line. Example, if I have a home, and my home is 2,000 square feet, and you have a single detached home as well, and it's 1,000 square feet, my home should be more, provided that the finishes in it are the same, the location is the same, so on and so forth. It would make sense that the larger home, all things being considered, is more money. So it wouldn't be uniformity making the same home the same value. You have to have reference to the assessments and make sure that they're in line. We're going to get more into that as the slides change. Here's another case. And again, I'm hoping you guys have it. And before I go into this case, let me stop. Questions online? No? Questions here? This is good. Oh, Jordan. Oh, I should say you.
Would you be able to compare, like you're talking about uniformity and buildings and whatnot, like the bank buildings? Would you be able to compare something in 2 different cities, like a London and Ottawa situation, where there's 2 buildings that are in different cities, but same general market?
Hold on, there's more. I've contemplated Jordan's question, and I'm going to get there in a few slides. At first we thought no, and that changed in 2012 if I'm correct. So this is a divisional court decision, should be binding, and I say should, operative word, should be binding on the ARB. Things have changed recently. And in Bayview Summit, I'm not going to read everything, you guys have the case, it's a very dense case, because as cases, the cases into the latter part of 2000s, what we're in right now, are much easier to read. Everything before 2000 is a little more difficult in my opinion. But the divisional court, this case went to divisional court, and what this is basically saying is that they took an office, I believe, in this property. An office, generally speaking, is an income-producing property. And what it did, in its first instance, not at divisional court, of course, what it did is it took a value per square foot of a property. So let's think about this a bit more. You might have 2 identical buildings in terms of floors and units, but one building you have TD Bank, you have, I'm thinking of great companies to name them, OPG, Impact. You have all these other companies that are, great tenants, they pay the rent, and it's really great. And the other building, they have, those darn lawyer companies and those paralegal companies, and they're late on the rent because it's hard being a paralegal. And, they might have more turnover because, it's the business that's starting, but, they don't last too long. Well, if you think about it, one property, in terms of income producing potential, would be worth more money. You have a lot of long-term tenants that are going to pay the bill every month versus maybe some other characters that might not pay in the same fashion, potentially. What the board did in its first instance here, and back then it was the OMB, they actually just took the buildings. And let's say, for example, it was $1 million, and there was 10,000 square feet in the building. They divided $1 million by 10,000 square feet. If my math is correct, that's $100 per square foot. And they applied that uniformly to other properties. And what this decision is basically saying, that you shouldn't do a comparison on a rate per square foot basis because you ignore other details with the property, such as its income producing potential. And it goes into a bit of an example of saying, if you use crude measurements like the number of doors and bathrooms, you're not really getting to the point of the property being income producing. So that's what the decision is saying, and it's kind of going into, funny, most of our case law is talking about how you don't do equity, not really how you do equity. And you're going to see that as we move forward. So let's go to the next slide. So this is going back to MPAC. How does MPAC look at equity? Again, a lot of cases don't tell us how to, so MPAC determined its own. So MPAC uses what I'm going to call from now on ASRs, which are assessment to sale ratios. So to do this, we take assessments of properties, we take sales of properties, and we literally do a mathematical equation. The assessment divided by the sale equals a ratio. Let's say, for example, you have a property and the assessment's $1 million. And in and around the valuation date, it sold for $1 million. $1 million divided by $1 million equals 1.00. In MPAC's terminology, that property is equitably assessed because the assessment is close to or matches what the sale price is. So let's think of it this way. The assessment is what you're paying taxes on. The sale price is what your property is worth. If those two align, then you're paying your fair share of the tax burden. If your assessment was $500,000 and your property sold for $1 million, well, you're paying probably half of your fair share of the tax burden. That's how MPAC works it. Let's go back to the bus example. You're supposed to pay $1, but you've paid 90 cents. So you're not paying your fair share of the bus fare. Think of it that way. You should be paying more. And that's how MPAC approaches it. For those stats buffs here, a normal population is 30. I won't go into this too much detail. If you randomly select a population of 30 or more, you can pretty much determine the population of anything in the world. That's what they say. Again, we don't want fewer than 10. Some municipalities don't have 30 sales in it to just easily do. But we're trying to get 30 properties to make that determination based on assessment to sale ratio, and we're making a reconciliation using a median to determine what that assessment to sale ratio is. Now I'll go further and we'll keep going into it. Do you have a question?
Yeah. So going back to that 30, if, for example, you're looking at a very small town, will you look at the larger township or the larger, area around it? Like instead of looking at, I don't know, a little hamlet, look at the larger. Okay.
So it gets trickier. You'll get to this when you have upper and lower tier municipalities. So in my job as manager of case management at MPAC, I have everything from Toronto out to Eastern Ontario, Pembroke, Brockville, Cornwall, all that stuff, Ottawa. And you have upper and lower tier. So Toronto is Toronto. It's one municipality. But think of Durham Region where we are right now. Durham is the upper tier, and the lower tier are Pickering, Ajax, Clarendon, Whitby, Oshawa. You get my point. So it gets a little more tricky, and we're going to get to that towards the end.
Okay.
So, Empire Realty, another very tough decision to read through. Again, look at the date, 1968. We don't know what they were saying back then. And this, to me, has the definition of what equity is, even though it's 50 years old. And what it's basically saying, for those of you reading the screen or reading the case or have read the case, the prime objective of equity is to ensure that everyone's paying their fair share of the tax burden. And that's the whole basis of the tax regime we live in. So in a municipality, I want to make sure every property is paying its fair share. Or in other words, I want to make sure every property is paying exactly what they should be paying so that I can run my municipality. Right? And in the end, it says it would be inequitable, you say it now, assessment if all similar lands in the vicinity were assessed at some percentage of actual value substantially less than 100. So think about what I said again. Let's go back to the bus example. You're supposed to pay $1, but you're paying 90 cents. So think of it, the ratio of 1, and think of the ratio of 0.9 being the 90 cents. That's substantially less in terms of assessment, lower than what they should be paying. But it has to be substantially less. The other example, when it's $1.10, that's more, so you don't make an equity adjustment. Now this is an important case because for a long, very, very long time, this is what we knew to be true, and this is what we followed in terms of what we believe equity is and how we try to achieve equity, making sure people pay their fair share of the tax burden. This slightly changes as we get further into the 2000s. So this is Koifman, 2011. This is a longer decision, but much easier to read. Again, 2011. And among other things, it does say a lot, but this really talks about the fact that equity shouldn't be taken lightly. It's a remedial remedy. It's a remedy within the statute that basically you shouldn't take it lightly and just make a lot of adjustments. You really have to do two things, it's saying. You have to identify there's a problem and that it's a serious problem that is showcased among other properties. And then you have to find a way to adjust for that problem. So it didn't really, although it adopted our assessment to sale ratio trend, it kind of said here, and this is the start of the ARB saying, there's no one way to do equity, and although MPAC chooses assessment to sale ratio, there are many other ways you can look at equity. And again, usually what you find from our courts and boards is that they haven't really told us how to do it. They spent more time telling us that we're doing it wrong. And that's very frustrating to people in the field because it's almost, in my mind, it'd be great if you can just regulate how you do equity, and then everyone's on the same page and we get to the same conclusion, or relatively so. Again, in that decision, I've taken bits and pieces out here. You really want to find that the value creates an inequity or unfairness or wrong of sufficient magnitude to require a remedy. So you're going to start seeing the start of ranges. So we went into ASRs and we talked about it being at 1.00. You're assessed at $1 million, you're sold for $1 million, calculation ends up being 1. What the board starts saying here is that usually there's a slight range that we should be cognizant of, and it's a 5% variance either way. So if you're at 0.95 or 1.05 in terms of your calculation, you're probably equitable in that case. So let's dig even deeper. I'm going to start showing you examples after this slide. I think I have 3 examples of equity studies that MPAC would produce. So before I go into it, before I get, I was going to ask, but I think I got my question answered. It says before I go into it, I'm going to ask, anyone have questions online? And the answer is no, I've seen. And anyone have questions here? Awesome. Before you tell me when you see these studies that they look a little wonky or you don't believe it showcases what I'm going to tell you it showcases, I know the criticisms because I go to court and I get criticized very often. So the first thing is you're going to see a preamble. It's very small, so you guys probably won't see it. And it talks about MPAC removing outliers. Now, for our stats buffs that are going to tell me what an outlier is, I know what it is. An outlier is a statistical measure that is 2 or 2.5 standard deviations away from your median or your mean. So I know what outlier is. What MPAC means when it talks about removing outliers, we're talking about the family sale. So you transfer a property from mom to child, and you sell it for $1. Well, your ASR is going to be pretty wonky if you say your assessment is $500,000 and your sale is $1. So we've removed those outliers. It's probably better put that we've removed sales that are not good indicators of market value. Loosely at MPAC, they say invalid sales, but I argue that because every sale that happens is valid. It happens, so it has to be valid. We don't live in Narnia. So the second criticism we get, and these are just 3 of the many criticisms we get, are extreme ratios. So usually people say, you've removed the outliers, but you have these extreme ratios. Again, outliers. The extreme ratios stay because those are ones that, you know what, there is nothing wrong that we can determine with the sale. It's just very far off from our assessment. So potentially, our assessment is way too low, and it's sold for a very high amount compared to our assessment. Or conversely, the sale is much too high. Our assessment is much too high and it's sold for a really low amount. Those aren't technically removed, but they're in the study. And what MPAC says, our position on that is, yeah, extreme ratios are there, but our measure of central tendency is a median. And if anyone knows anything about the 3 measures of central tendencies, median, mode, and mean, the median actually discounts all outliers. The average would have brought them in and it would have skewed the results either way, but the median actually discounts everything. So that is our position on that. Although there may be differing opinions, we'll keep going. Number 3 is our lack of tightness around the 1.00, and we'll look at that. So let's flip to a slide. I don't expect you guys to read this off the screen, because I have another slide after. This is typically, I'm in the middle of changing this for my corporation, so it'll be changed maybe next month. However, historically, this is typically what an equity study would look like. We have our 30 properties, and we have our map. Of the blue means the sales that we've chosen, and the red is the actual subject. So this same study is duplicated on the next slide, made a bit bigger. And just so you know, when it says property code 301, that's a single family detached home. It's an MPAC administrative code, don't worry about it. But here you go, we would have had a subject property, 123 MPAC Street, and we would have used these properties that are in and around the vicinity, and we've determined, you can see in a couple columns over, the assessments listed there and the sale date, and then you have this time-adjusted sale. And simple calculation, if you took out your calculator and did the assessment, divided by the sale price, you would get that ratio. We've done that 30 times. We've stratified them from lowest to highest. And we've taken the median, which is the midpoint between the 15th and 16th property, and that is 1.01. In other words, our assessments based on that median, they are very, very close to 1.00. So if this was our equity study and the board member agreed that this is a good sampling of properties, then our position, or my position on closing would be there is no proof that this value is inequitable after we found the current value. It's not always so easy, because when you go to the following slide, And I have a few examples of these. You have another one. Oh, let's go back one. Okay. 340s, just so you know, 340s are just a multi-residential property, no commercial, so no store or daycare at the bottom. So, and a 341 that you see there is a commercial structure at the bottom. So same thing we've done here, same process, I won't go over it. You see what we've done here. We have coefficient of dispersion, I won't touch on it, but if you guys want to take it offline or email me, I could talk at length and nauseam about it. What we've done here is we've stratified them, but you can see now our median is 0.88. So let's go back to our example. This would be the equivalent of $1 bus fare, but Lori charged you 88 cents, right? So now we have an equity problem, because what I would say, based on this study, is that based on our median, properties are paying 12% lower than their true current values. So if you look closely, the properties numbered, look at 15 and 16 where our median come from, if you look at those properties, you would see that the assessment on property 15 is $648,000, but our time adjusted sale is $732. So think of it this way, that property, if MPAC had all the data in the world, that property should be assessed at $732. But we missed the mark for whatever reason, and we assessed it at $648. That property is paying taxes on $648,000. Now if I'm looking at that, and I'm a property way down here, I'm a little upset, because I'm paying taxes on 2.2, excuse me, and my property only sold for 1.1. So this is where the ratios come in, and this is how you start looking at equity. Because properties based on ratio are paying much less than their true current values, there may be need, and I say may because it gets a little more complex than that, there may be need for an adjustment to be made at court, or I wouldn't go to court with this anyways. So you might make an adjustment before you go to court. Now, just to pick one property to show you a little bit of a difference, if your median was the last property at 1.2, you wouldn't make an adjustment, because what 1.2 says is that people are paying taxes, or that property or your median, they're paying taxes on a higher amount than what they sold for. So to be equitable, I should pay taxes on an amount higher than my current value. But 44.3b says you don't make an increase. You only make the adjustment if it goes lower. Keep that in mind. We'll go to one more example. I think I have at least one more example. Maybe I don't. Oh, no, go back one. Maybe I already.
This one.
Oh, no, that's good. Perfect. Well, you can go forward. Go back one more. Okay. So again, I've told you that MPAC's position is the ASR is the best indicator of value, of equity, excuse me. I told you about the variance of 5%. That's generally accepted by the Assessment Review Board and by courts. We have divisional court and court of appeal cases that they've adopted that. Talk a bit about this International Association of Assessing Officers. That's a US-based organization. They are located out of Texas, Little Rock, Arkansas, maybe. Little Rock, Arkansas, I lied. And they are internationally known. And a lot of the appraisal theory comes from this organization. They're much, much larger than any organization in the world. So MPAC has adopted many of their standards. Now in Ontario, we are slowly developing or rejuvenating the Institute of Municipal Assessors. So it's a shameless plug for that organization. I'm a part of that organization, and we've adopted many of their practices as well, and we're in the middle of making our ethics course. It's 2 years out now, and other courses that you can get accreditation and designation behind your name. So in conjunction with the IAAO, we have the IMA, and that kind of helps us form our body of law. So I added this in, and this is my humble opinion, that there may be other ways to determine equity. I'm going to give you another example. Hopefully these examples are working. Let's say you have a condominium. So each unit, you have an owner for it, obviously. And there are 8 units on every floor, and there's 20 floors. And you have 101, 102, 103, so on and so forth, till 108. Repeat 20 times. And let's say you're determining the current value of that, your unit at 101. And nothing in your building sold, so you kind of went outwards and got some other sales from other neighborhoods, and you kind of found the value of your property. You're okay with it. It's $1 million. Great. You're in Toronto, obviously, $1 million for a condo. But let's say now you're looking to equity, and you don't believe those properties that you've used that are down the street are similar. You really want to look in your building at the 160 units or whatever it is that you have in your building. Nothing sold though, but you're at 101 and every floor upwards, 201, 301, 401, so on and so forth, they're identical. Same finishes, and let's assume that there's no premium as you go up for view. Same everything, but none have sold. So you can't do an ASR because to do an ASR, assessments and sales, and a calculator maybe. But you need those things to do assessment sale ratio. But as you go up in your floor, you realize that 201 is assessed at 500,000, and 301 is assessed at 500,000, 401 is 600,000, and so on and so forth. But none are $1 million. It's my opinion that you can still determine equity without sales, because if everything being true and all identical, you can just look at the assessments and realize that it's not fair or it's not equitable. Because similar properties are not assessed the same way you are, for whatever reason. So that's just a little tidbit. You never get data sets that are that clean, but think of it a little more abstract. I don't want you to believe that the way MPAC does things is the only way you can do things. Just keep in mind that there are other ways you can look at equity. Okay, there's only a few more and we're gonna take a break. 2016 Schumacher, which I provided that case to you, I'm sure. This is a little different, and I won't go into the dense details of this case. In its first instance, MPAC actually did not proffer any equity evidence. We thought we were scot-free. This was not my case. And at its first instance, the board actually took rates per unit of an office building and actually made an equity finding. Now let's think back a couple slides, Bayview Summit. Remember that, you don't have to go back. But remember that the Division of Court said you shouldn't take a rate per unit because you ignore the income producing potential of a property, so on and so forth. Well, they did it at the board, so we thought we were great. We did a review of everyone's tribunals. You review to the same board, and after that, you ask for leave, you go to Divisional Court, Court of Appeal, so on and so forth. What came out of this decision is a few things. One, it said that there are many different ways to determine equity, and it's like, yeah, we've been hearing that for years and years and years. Thank you for that, with all respect to the court. The other thing it said is that although the court believed that that might not have been the best way to determine equity, because the legislation is written in a way that the board must find equitable finding, right? 44.3a, 44.3b. What it said was that it must use whatever it has before it. And because that was the only evidence proffered before it, they made a finding based on what they had. So my interpretation of this case means bring your evidence to court. Because when you don't, the board's going to use whatever it has, and they have that power as an administrative tribunal or an adjudicative tribunal to do so. There are many other things that happen in this case, and some people believe now that MPAC's ASR means you can't do it. No. All it means is bring the right evidence to court, and the board's going to pick. It's the theory of best evidence. And we'll go one more, and this is the last case I'm getting into, and I'll take questions and we'll take a break. So this goes back to the question. I haven't forgot about the question I got asked about vicinity. And again, this is the life I live, and I love it to a fault. But this is an amazing case to me. I watched all the cases actually you've seen for the most part, not the 1968 one, I'm not that old, but many of the cases that are in the time I spent at MPAC I've watched at any court level. And this one I actually saw, and it was very interesting because outside of the facts, it's legal interpretation, so that's what I want to share with you guys. In this first instance, it's a divisional court case. In this first instance, we're looking at car dealerships, the Chrysler case. And what actually happened was there were car dealerships within the city of Toronto, and the appellant took car dealerships in the city of Toronto and outside. They went to Peel region and York region and somewhere else, I believe. And when you looked at the car dealerships within the city of Toronto and you did an assessment to sale ratio study, the appellant agreed and MPAC agreed that the property was equitably assessed. Yay for MPAC. But when you looked outside the municipality, the ASR dropped to, I believe it was 0.68. So you're talking about 32% of whatever you're finding out your properties are worth. In its first instance, MPAC was successful, and even in the second instance at the review. At divisional court, I thought the lawyer on the other side did a magnificent job. He pulled other types of legislation. So I want to hammer into the paralegals listening everywhere, tell a friend to tell a friend. Don't get caught in the body of law you're in. Look to other types of statutes. So let's go back to, before I go further with this, and I'll get to it in about 2 minutes, let's go back to Empire Realty. You're supposed to determine whether properties are paying their fair share of the tax burden. Tax burden, in terms of tax percentage, really only lies within that municipality. Toronto, their residential tax rate is about 0.77. Oshawa, unfortunately, is about 1.5. So you really can't determine, in my opinion, tax burden in two different municipalities because, of course, you're going to pay a different tax burden with a different tax rate. So our opinion was that vicinity is narrowed to just the municipality you're in due to that fact. What the lawyer did on this side is he actually tried to find definitions of vicinity. Now, in Municipal Act 2001, they actually defined vicinity. I don't think this is a direct quote, but it says, here's what vicinity means, and they relate it to an old section in the Act still there, but 44.2. And they said, this is what vicinity means, but it shall not exceed the boundaries of a single tier or upper tier municipalities. So very directive. Here's vicinity, but you can't go outside the boundaries of that municipality. If you're in Toronto, you can't go outside Toronto in the Municipal Act. The equity provision under the Assessment Act is new as of 2009. Therefore, the legislature, you have to assume they knew everything at the time. The vicinity definition of the Municipal Act already existed. So the lawyer said, if the legislator, and you have to agree, the legislature has all the facts before it, they see the definition of vicinity, but in the Assessment Act, it does not say specifically that you shall not exceed the municipal boundaries. So, interpreting it, he said, they would have said that if that's what they meant because they've said it before. So they purposely didn't, which means they must have meant that you can go extra municipal boundaries. Division of Court, he was successful, and now you can extend beyond municipal boundaries. So that's the answer to your question. Of course, I still disagree with the logic, but I like the argument raised. Like, you got to appreciate what he said. And if the province doesn't really like that, Ministry of Finance, they should do an amendment. So until then, the way MPAC determines it is that you can go outside municipal boundaries if you need to. But if I have 30 sales really close and I'm downtown Toronto, I need not go to Durham or York or so ever. But car dealerships, very few sales with municipality, you might have to extend beyond. Now, I'm going to stop here for a break. Was there any questions before we take a break? One question here?
Yeah, how would you get your hands on assessments of a property?
Wait, there's more. Wait till we go to the second piece.
Okay, perfect.
So we'll take a break here for 10 minutes and we'll regather. Thank you. Oh, I just like talking.
Jason, do you have a holding slide there? Would you be able to put a holding slide up for 10 minutes? Do you have it on file? Just want to know about the Global Class website. Do you have the cards to get to the Global Class website? Yeah, do you need it, just so you know? There's a URL here. Okay. Because I'll leave them over here, okay, if you want.
URL to get to all of the different.
Okay. Thank you. I think it was a little more than 10 minutes. Maybe it was 11 or 12, but we'll settle right back in. Thank you for indulging me through the first part. I hope you got something out of it. I could talk to you about assessment for an entire semester probably, for those of you that are in school or were in school recently, and we'll talk about some professionalism later, and we'll talk about entire programs built just around assessment, but we'll get to that hopefully within 45 minutes, so we get your professional hours today. The next part I want to go through is the new Assessment Review Board rules. This is kind of serendipitous or apropos that we're going right into rules that are effective 5 to 6 weeks ago. This really changes the way we've done things, so I haven't put all of the old and done a comparison with the new. But as we go through the new, I'll tell you how transformative this is and has been to the assessment bar and the agents and representatives within the community. So without further ado, we'll hit the next slide. I have another agenda of things I'm going to go through. The reasons for the change, and you'll see some of those numbers and the moments that we've realized that we have to make a change because of the backlog of appeals. I'm going to go through some of the changes at a high level. Again, I'll give you resources to, or maybe you already have the resources to look up other reasons why there are changes. I'm going to go through shameless plugs of MPAC and all the great work we've been doing and all the things we've done to get ourselves prepared for the changes that the ARB has proposed. And I'm going to go through municipal impact. They don't get spoken about enough, but all of these things we're doing has really one party that needs us to do a good job or prejudice if we do a bad job. And those are municipalities, all 444 of them. So as we fix the rug, we'll go to the next slide.
Sure. Go ahead.
So this is a snapshot that I pulled. I didn't pull it. Someone helped me pull this. Thank you for my MPAC team. They put these numbers together to give you an idea of what's happening in terms of appeals as of April 1st, 2017. So we're in a reassessment year, like I said. We have a lot more appeals that got filed. I think we're close to 25,000 at this point in time. But notwithstanding those new appeals, as of April 1st, 2017, this is what our world looked like. Some things you might not understand, nomenclature, won't go through all of it, but you have appeals and you have properties. So let me try to explain this quickly. We work in 4-year cycles. So if you appeal your home in, for example, 2017, your matter may not be heard in 2017, or 18, or 19, 2020, or 2021. So as you go year to year, we have something called deemed appeals. You deem your appeals within a 4-year cycle. So sometimes we can be well into a base year of the assessment world, and you could technically have 4 years of appeals on your property. You have to appeal your property and it gets deemed year over year because of course you pay taxes annually. So when you adjust the value, you're pretty much adjusting the value for the 4-year cycle. A new 4-year cycle starts, so on and so forth. So the number of appeals were just over 5,000. In terms of property count, as of April 1st, 2017, it was 2,446. And like I said, you just have an influx of appeals that came in recently. And the last time I counted, which was last week, it was about 25,000. So add the 2,500 to that 25,000. That's what the world at MPAC looks like. MPAC is a party to all of the appeals in the province. So there are evaluation staff and there's my team that do this work, and we are responsible for the administration of appeals within our corporation. You have some residential and non-residential. We count residential being anything like a single family dwelling and a farm, and everything outside of that we say is non-residential. So any commercial storefronts you see, or multi-res building, CN Tower, so on and so forth, those are all non-residential. So as you can see, once you go down the numbers, you can see how many appeals we've had. Total appeals at the bottom. You can add that 24 and change, total, residential, non-residential, different tax years, and add that total to what we just got. So in fact, we have about 50,000 appeals, when you think of it that way, properties when I say that, right? It's a lot of properties that we're dealing with year over year. There are some outstanding properties that go back many, many years, like Pearson Airport is one that's still going on, that goes back to 1998. You have things like, I'm Toronto-centric, excuse me, but you have things like the West Don Land. So if anyone knows about the eastern part of Toronto, through Regent Park and stuff like that, that's all being transformed. That's a heavy piece of litigation, so on and so forth. So we're doing our best at Impact to get through this stuff. So let's go to the next slide. Just to go and tell everyone the lay of the land. Someone asked me a question on break about what my life looks like in terms of assessment. So let's give you some historical context. An appeal gets filed for the 2012 base year, which is 13, 14, 15, 16, those tax years. And an appeal gets filed, and you have to do a procedure order. This is going back our old rules. You have to do a procedure order to get the matter moving through the system, so you have to file a statement of issues if you're the appellant. MPAC has to respond. You have to do some procedure orders, productions, order for discovery, motions, so on and so forth. On average, we took some case study numbers and pulled properties. On average, that would go through 5 telephone conference calls. Telephone conference calls are like pre-hearings just done over the phone. So those are 5 procedural matters you have to do before you're getting to the nuts and bolts of the property. You have to sometimes inspect the property for MPAC. Someone might be raising a condition issue with their property. You have to inspect it. Then you get to a mediation potentially back then, or some sort of hearing event. This would take years to do, as you can imagine. The amount of properties you have, multiplied by the number of pre-hearing events you have, multiply that over year. So this is the problem the board has realized very quickly. And at first it was kind of like, okay, the parties in the field are kind of not holding the end of the bargain. They're slowing things down. This is conjecture, but the assessment bar, lawyers and paralegals, they are holding things up so that the longer you wait, by the time you get a reduction, it's a larger tax bill for municipalities. Municipalities are all up in arms because year after year, if you have 15 years of appeals and you have to give a big reduction, well, you're not budgeting for that because your budgets go annually. So it's a lot of losses to municipalities. MPAC is, we might be seen as a corporation that has a lot of resources. We're actually fiscally pretty tight corporation. We run pretty lean, so that's a huge drain on resources. Sometimes you have experts that are handling one property, but if something lasts 15 years, the expert could have, through attrition, moved to another position. They could have moved to a different position within the corporation, not doing assessment anymore. They could have passed away. Who knows what happened? So you have turnover and the knowledge gaps that happen there. Huge problems in terms of administering appeals. So, we'll go to the next slide. How do we solve this problem? Simple. They need to be done faster. And the board has pretty much said, we're putting forward some mechanisms and procedures that allow us to administer appeals faster. Now, before I go on and tell you guys about all the changes, you can imagine that if you're used to 5 pre-hearing events and taking things pretty leisurely and getting a lot of leeway from the board, what I'm going to show you is going to be devastating as you go forward. So let's go to the next slide. The first thing you have to do when you're changing the process to make it more efficient is get people to be more compliant, because a lot of the delays were because MPAC would say, for example, we need an inspection, and the board would say, okay, I'll give you guys 90 days to set up an inspection and see the property. And 120 days later, you go back to a pre-hearing event, and then we say, I sent an email, but I didn't hear back, and I didn't do anything after that, so we didn't inspect the property. And the board would be like, okay, well, I'll give you 90 days, do another inspection. And then we did one and come back to another hearing event, and then we'd be like, yeah, we did an inspection, we gave them our position. And they'd be like, yeah, you did, I forgot, but we needed some productions from MPAC. Okay, well, we'll set another date in 4 months from now. And we do that, and we'd say like, yeah, we gave them some of the productions, some we don't have, and we told them that, but they haven't gotten back to us. This goes on and on and on. And it's no one party's fault, it's just something that happens. Or you finally settle the property, and the municipality jumps in and says, wait a minute, how did you get to that settlement? And you have to recreate the whole process you went through for a year or 2. So there are many things you have to do in terms of compliance. So what the board has said, I'm going to look at these 4 things and try to make you more compliant to push the appeals through the system. So I'm going to talk about each of these one by one: scheduling, timelines, disclosure, and ADR component mediation. So we'll go to the next slide. Thank you. So scheduling. What the board has pretty much said is that we work in a 4-year cycle. We're going to take all of the appeals, old, 25,000 appeals, and the new, at this point, 25,000, they'll be old, and we're going to schedule them all within 4 years. And and that's daunting. So if you're doing your numbers, those people online with calculators or here, we've averaged it out to be about 1,200 appeals per month are going to be scheduled. So a schedule of some sort will be starting and running through the process. Now, if you have a small group of appeals, if you're a representative, you might be able to get by it. If you're a larger firm, pretty difficult. If you're MPAC, close to impossible, because we're party to every appeal. To put it in perspective, on not my team in particular, but department-wide across the province in case management, we have 19 senior staff that are advocates for going to be 50,000 appeals or more. Very, very difficult. I don't know of many paralegals that have a caseload as large as our groups. I have very high density areas, Toronto and Ottawa, so on average they would have like 3,000 matters that they advocate. Very daunting. The board is going to assign a schedule of events that I'll take you through, and every month a new schedule of events will start. So you can imagine by the time you're in month 8, you have 8 scheduled events for your properties going through the system. It's very, very hard to handle. We have some influence, being at MPAC, and as well as the assessment committee in the municipal world, of deciding what goes first. So you may want to put, if you're a municipality, you might want to put some of your more taxing properties up front, because you don't want that property to wait 4 years to be scheduled and then get some losses. Usually those properties that form that problem for the municipalities are usually more difficult ones. Pearson Airport, Bank Towers, Rogers Centre, you get my point. Yorkdale Mall, one of the most expensive properties we have in Ontario. So we're trying to work with the board to see how we schedule these properties to make it more palatable for us. So let's go to the next slide. And I'll stop in a few minutes to see if we have questions. The board has made 2 types of proceedings. So before we didn't have these, so this is revolutionary in that sense. Summary, which are residential, farm, managed forest, and conservation land. I'm not looking, but I think those are it. And everything else, irrespective of what the value is in the general proceeding. Now, we're trying to be cost effective here, so the board may not want everything going in-person hearings. You can imagine that it takes the board member, a municipal rep, an MPAC rep or 2, who's my witness, and the agents and their witnesses. So they're trying to say, can we do it in a more cost-efficient manner? And that we're trying to do by electronic, telephone conference full hearings. We'll see how it works out. We've done a few, and there are some difficulties with people speaking, and some people want their day in court, and I understand that. So we'll see how that works out. Now, if you want to see the difference between summary and general, we'll switch to a few slides. I think it's going to come up very shortly, but I'll get back to it if it's not. Oh, okay, so the next couple slides, we'll go through them quickly. This is just a list of MPAC property codes. These are all the property codes, so you can go through them slowly. These are the property codes that will be in the summary stream. They're generally thought to be very easy properties, residential homes, the farms, student housing, different things like that, not the big stuff. We're hopefully going to put these in the summary stream and get through them a lot faster. You can go to the next slide. For those properties that I labeled, that are the residential properties, they all need something called a request for reconsideration. I didn't go into much detail here. I want to tell you about initiative MPAC's done, but a request for reconsideration is a mandatory prerequisite for anything in a residential class. What that means is a homeowner or a taxpayer or the representative would file a request for reconsideration. They cannot appeal directly to Assessment Review Board. They must do this step. It's intended that it comes to MPAC and we take a review of that property and we provide an answer back. It's a one-shot deal. You give us something, we give you something back. If the recommendation for the value, you like it, great. If not, you then have the opportunity to decline what we've said and file an appeal to the Assessment Review Board. If you are commercial or industrial property, you can file directly to the Assessment Review Board. What happens on some of these requests for reconsiderations are that it's usually representatives, to be quite honest. They file the form and they say, assessment too high, and they hand it to MPAC. And that does nothing for us. We don't know what you mean by that. And we try to do a review the best we can, and maybe we've not done our job sometimes too. And then we say, here's your value, or too bad, so sad. We've started to push back in the last year, and we've said, if you're going to file a request for review based on under section 39.1, a subsection there talks about that you must present all the relevant facts and the basis for your request for review. In our opinion, our interpretation of that, MPAC's, is that assessment too high is not relevant facts that say that your property is overassessed. So in fact, what we're telling the agents we do, and we stood by this, if we receive a request for RFR, I'm going to call it right now, that just says assessment too high, we are not going to respond to it. We are going to say that that RFR is null and void. And if you don't file an RFR, you can't file an appeal. And that was our position we took. And we got lots of relevant facts once we've said that and put our foot down. Now, it might seem like we've done something pretty harsh to the assessment world, but in fact, it's actually better. Because if you handle it at the RFR stage, you won't have the appeal later on. So why do an administrative step just to file an appeal, just to give me the relevant facts then, to get it dealt with 3 years later? Give it to me now. I'll have some people look at it. I dedicated my own staff to this, and voila, we got great reasons, and we've actually disposed of a lot of appeals. To put in perspective, 4 years ago, at this point in time, we had something like 45,000 appeals. But I think it was a big initiative, and our values got better. It was a big initiative that RFRs helped reduce it. Now at 25,000, we're looking at it as pretty good. Some of you guys are looking and saying 25,000 is a whole lot of properties. But I think we're doing a good job. Next slide. So again, I went through this. What we've actually found is that the homeowner would actually give us way more reasons. You know, that's John Smith that knows the neighbors and has lived there for a while, and they're saying, I know this guy has this property, and this woman has this property, and my house is inferior to theirs for these reasons, and I think I should be this. It was really the tax agents and council that have a lot of properties that maybe would file something that's not as supportive and substantial. So we pushed back on it, and here we are. I think it's getting better. Our RFR stage is getting a lot better. Summary proceeding. I don't expect everyone to read through this. It's a visual to show you the next slide. And I'm not going to show the next slide yet, but this is just, again, the residential stuff, managed forest, farm, conservation land. They go through this. So for these types of properties, the board would set a commencement date, let's say July 1st. It would start. 4 weeks later, say August 1st, the parties exchange disclosure. So municipality, taxpayer, MPAC, you exchange your position on the value. Interesting enough, the next step is the mandatory settlement meeting, which is interesting because I don't think many other courts or tribunals say that you must meet in the presence absent of the board. So they are actually demanding that we meet as a group to discuss what has been exchanged, and the board is not present. From there, you either resolve the appeal, take the top line, or you advise the board that you need to go to a hearing, and you go through that route. If you do have a settlement, you do minutes of settlement, and there are rules around that. I'm not spending a lot of time on this because the next slide you'll realize why the general proceeding is a little more complex. So what you'll see here are that the timelines for general proceeding are much longer. I don't expect everyone to read through this. I'll touch on some key points here. But again, irrespective of value, so you could be a mom and pop store that's just trying to run your business, and you could be assessed at $900,000, less than some houses in Toronto, or almost every house in Toronto. And you'd start, say, July 1st, and I'll tell you that this entire process is approximately 103 weeks, which is 2 years for those math buffs out here. And what this is saying is MPAC provides disclosure, and this disclosure is a little different, and I'm going to speak about it in slides to come. And it relates to a question I got asked about. How would the average taxpayer get all this information? You're talking about 30 assessment to sale ratios and all this stuff you would need. How do I know the taxpayer, the cost approach or the income approach? We're going to get to that, and a big part of that is MPAC producing disclosure within 4 weeks of a commencement date. So if the commencement date was July 1st for a general proceeding property, by August 1st, MPAC must provide its disclosure, and I'll talk about that. The appellant then has a chance to request additional productions if they don't feel our disclosure is adequate. If we object to providing anything else, you have a period to do a motion, going to further to the top of the first line. And if it's okay, then the appellant would provide a statement of issues. At that point in time, we receive it. We get to tell the appellant, that we need to do an inspection if we want one, or we need additional productions. Again, they can oppose it. You have a motion period. Having said that, moving forward, then MPAC would do its response. And then there are a lot of other procedural steps that go forward, and I'm going to touch on those ADR components as we go forward, so I won't touch on them right now. But again, you go through a mandatory settlement meeting, you go through a settlement conference, a mediation, and then a full hearing with expert reports in between. That's a lot of work for a property that may not be a lot of value, so let's dig deeper into that. The board has in its new rules, and I'm even still learning them right now because it's only been 5 weeks, Rule 45 that we must provide disclosure. And I'm going to talk about that, so let's move forward to another slide. So let me stop here before I talk about old and new disclosure. Questions? Still sleeping? That's awesome. Any questions here? Good. So old disclosure, this is my visual I found. Thank you, Google Images. And you're thinking of it and many other types of law. You serve parties through other means of service, or the olden days it was Cowboy Stadium. You hand your disclosure in the day of court, and you read through it, and you go to court. The new disclosure is a lot more information MPAC's providing, and these are shameless plugs starting now, just to warn everyone. Next slide, please. MPAC is starting this 2016 CVA, which is tax years 17, 18, 19, 20. We have 3 pieces of disclosure that we are now providing to every property owner, not just people that appeal, every property owner in Ontario. The first of which, so we call it 3 levels, and it could be 4 coming up that I'm working on. But the first level is the methodology guide. So what this basically is, if you remember 20 slides ago, I talked about the sales comparison, the income approach, and the cost approach. This methodology guide breaks down those approaches, and depending on your type of property, we go through at a very high level and say, because you own a pulp and paper mill, this is what MPAC did when we looked at your property in terms of the cost approach. You own a residential property, this is how MPAC collects data and formulates its model, and this is how we spit values out. You own an office building. MPAC goes to the market, we find other people that have leased similar units, and then we apply those rents on a mass appraisal system to different units in a municipality, and here it is. So it's at a very, very high level, just saying here's what we've done for your property type. And I don't remember how many there are, but there are many, many methodology guides. I'll tell you about more where they're available. The level 2, I'm going to call MVR. We're a creature of titles. MPAC is a creature of acronyms here. The MVR is the market valuation reports. This goes a little deeper into it. So it gives the property owner or taxpayer representative a further look into the analytics. So you're a residential owner. Here are all the sales we looked at in the province. And I'm going to stratify them by neighborhood, by homogeneous neighborhood, by municipality, to say this is what we've done, and this is why your value is the way it is. So it's taking still a broad look. It's not talking about your individual property, but it's talking about your property type and the analytics that went behind it. So for our costed properties, we would say this is where we got our data. It's not a secret. We get our data from a company called Hanscom, which gives us cost rates. So what is the cost of a wall per foot? What does lighting cost these days? And that helps us regenerate our value if we were recreating a building just like this. What our floor is worth, so on and so forth. They also help us with their depreciation tables. So your property brand new is X amount. But if the property's 50 years old, well, it's quite depreciated, and they give us the rates for that, and we incorporate this into a mass appraisal model. All of this, analytics, vacancy rates, fair market rents, everything is available in the level 2 analysis with many appendices that take you through MPAC's process. We collect data under sections 13. We are collecting data from every property owner that has an income property. They should be giving us what we call tenant information, and we put that in our system. Then from there, we take out outliers and extreme ratios. Then we put it in our model. The model spits out another value. That's what that's telling you. If you do anything, read some of these and you'll actually learn something about assessment. Level 3 is property specific. So after you know what we did for your property type and how we valued it, and now you know the analytics behind all the properties we collected just like yours, if you follow them along, now you know why your value is the way it is. Not to say it's 100% correct, but the model should follow a certain sequence to get you to your value. The 4th level that's not here because I'm still working on it as of this afternoon, is if on review, so the model spits up values, and we have a short window at MPAC to review all the values in the province. So literally we have all our staff reviewing the value to see if it translates. After the model spit out a value, does that value translate to market value? If we've made an adjustment outside of the model, well, technically going through this process, you wouldn't be able to follow your value. So the level 4 piece is to say, if MPAC made an adjustment, so we've said, oh, you're on Simcoe, you deserve a 10% adjustment downwards, we're going to provide you with another report that says this is why we've done that. And there's the data behind why we made another change. So it's revolutionary in the sense that we protected our model for so long, vis-a-vis 30 slides ago when I talked about Kogan. And now we're opening up just a little bit more to say, this is what we did, this is the process, these are the data behind it, and this is how it relates to your property. Now I think I just talked through the next 2 or 3 slides. Let's see. Level 1, that's what it is. Let's go in. Level 2, that's what it is too. And if I was good, I said everything on these. So let's go to the next slide. So where do you find these reports? Well, About My Property, or AMP. Every notice that you get, if you own a home, you get an assessment notice. On that notice, you will have the website for About My Property, and you will have an individualized key or access code or password that is individualized towards your property. If you were to go to the website, it would look very similar to this. You would put in your user ID that the notice has on it, you'd put in your password, and you would get into About My Property. Next slide, please. It would look something very similar to this. You get a snapshot of your property, if we have an image for it, the details in terms of assessment and some other site variables. On the right side of the screen, we have the My Property tab, My Notices and Profiles and Reports. My Property tab would be details about your property. Doesn't matter what property you have it here. My Notices and Profiles, so as you get assessment notice to a reassessment or any change that we give you through notices, you can actually pull it up electronically there. And the last tab that you're on right now is Reports. You can see it says Methodology Guide. You can see it says Market Valuation Report there too. And they would have hyperlinks, and you would download your reports directly from the website. I have a question.
This is, sorry, this is every 4 years.
Generally speaking, we do a reassessment every 4 years. Yes. And for the most part, the average property in Ontario gets one notice. But imagine you have a home and you built a pool. If you did it the right way, you would have taken a building permit. Well, building permits get circumvented to MPAC. We would monitor the completion, and when you got your pool, it can be argued at least that your house is more valuable. So you might get another notice that increases your value 10 grand. Don't quote me on that. Might be a lot more. And that notice would then be uploaded here as well, virtually real time from when we send it out. So it might seem like, why didn't MPAC always do this? This is very revolutionary. We've never provided this level of detail. In the past, with the old disclosure, you'd have to ask, someone would have to look for it, someone would have to want to give it to you, and you may get it. Right now, this is everything up front, nothing hidden. A big part of our 4-year strategic plan, the last 4 years, was transparency, and I guess it can still be argued, but I think this is very transparent now. Hey, question?
Can you look at anybody's property as many times as you want?
There's more. I'm going to get to that. That's a great question. I think it's going to come up. I'm going to stop here. I'm going to get to that question. Still swimming. Awesome. So let's get to that question. Let's go next slide. So we're going to get to it in these next 2 slides. So there are 4 main sections about my property, and I won't read everything to you there, but we try to give you market analytics. So it's interesting, just as a side note, shameless plug again. You hear CBC and Global and even Toronto Real Estate Board, and they give you all these changes from month to month and stuff like that. All that data comes from MPAC. They take our data and take our changes and our AVM model, which I won't get into now, and they report numbers out. So MPAC has all the trends that we provide, and municipalities get this stuff as well through another portal I'll speak about. We talk about how assessment works, which is our disclosure pieces, of course. You see your property in the My Neighborhood. It's my friend's question in the back. You can view up to 100 properties and download a report of 24 properties. So you get views of snapshots of properties, and then you can actually download 24 properties within the About My Property screen for every property notice you have. So yes, the question is, if I have 2 properties, can I double dip? And right now we haven't found a way around that, so yes, you can double dip. On the next screen, if I did my report correctly, yes. Kind of goes into more detail. You can compare a property with 24 properties of your choice. Everything else I've said. And if you go to the next screen, it'll show you how it looks. It'll look like that. Yes, question?
But that's only per notice that you have.
Per property. Yes.
Per property.
Per property. Right? So then the question would be, what if I'm a tax agent and I have, I won't say the company because I'm not plugging their names, but let's say I have 12,000 properties. Well, they get a lot of snapshots. However, I would argue that if you have one property and you need to make a determination on value, I've never gone to court with 24 comparable properties ever in my life. I don't think I've done more than 8. If you need to report with more than 8 comparables, you're going to bore someone. Tell your story, right? It looks like this. Again, you have little arrows, orange arrows to go up and down on the screen. Again, once you have this property, you can actually download it and print it. It comes in this format. And I think for the person that is not as affluent or not as astute, this really prepares them for court. they're able to pick properties within their neighborhood that they find are comparable and get all the characteristics in terms of names, the values, what criteria in terms of they can see the bedroom sizes, the square footage of another property that MPAC has, finished basement or not, type of garage, any nuisance factors and adjustments like busy streets or ravine that would give you a positive adjustment and so on and so forth. If you've got a corner, it might be more, it might be less, depending on where you are. This is something MPAC gives you. You create it online. Once you think you're satisfied, you can print it. Other than some verbiage around it, you are pretty much ready for court. Again, it's a shameless plug, but honestly, this is revolutionary to the assessment world of what we give. So I'll switch and go to another topic. This is just plugging municipalities here. We're looking out for you two municipalities. We've done a separate portal for municipalities that gives them increased transparency. Municipalities always argue they want a stable tax base, roll stability, assessment roll stability, which technically stability means you don't move, so they want up, they just don't want down. So stability in the sense that they don't want values to go down. But we're trying to give them increased predictability so when things are at risk, we can show them that, oh, here's what we're getting on appeal. Your property may be at risk, you might want to get more involved or have some other mitigating measures. It gives them assessment info they've never had before, so it limits the inquiries. We're really focusing on having the taxpayer self-serve. Go online in this day and age and get the information you need. MPAC will provide it for you. So municipalities have greater functionality through their own portal that we've made April 2016. So going back to the scheduled events, I told you I'd spend more time on the settlement discussion and the mediation part, the ADR part. It's quite interesting what's going to happen. So you can go to the next slide. It's quite interesting that we have a settlement conference and a mediation. So many of my team in the assessment world, go next slide, are having questions around what's going to be the difference between the two, settlement conference and a mediation. Well, the board has told us several things. So the new rules, 57 through 59, talk about settlement conference and what you could do there. Sorry if I'm speaking quicker. Settlement conferences are going to be a moment with the board with a group of properties where after all the exchange of information and inspections and productions, the board is going to meet. They want the parties to have binding authority, which is a huge thing in the assessment world for both MPAC, taxpayers, and municipalities. Sometimes the taxpayers' representatives have to contact the taxpayer who's not around. If I go to court, I have a limited scope of what I can settle at before I need some other approval. And municipalities, sometimes the reduction is so large, they need council approval. CIL ending when I say council. Notwithstanding that, the board member in this case will be a little more evaluative. So those that took ADR, evaluative means they're going to maybe give you their opinion a little more forcefully and say, you know what, there's a case on this, this is already decided, you guys should be selling the property or someone should be withdrawing or amends the settlement. A lot more directive here. If that's not the case, they may be setting up other procedural dates. Okay, well, do you want to go straight to full hearing? How many witnesses you're going to call? Can you narrow the issues? You know, Mr. Appellant or Miss Appellant, you've claimed 10 things. Are we going to narrow it down to 3 things and only talk about those 3? So it's, again, a confidential process of trying to narrow the issues, and that's what the board is trying to do. Provide more points of contact so that parties narrow the issues and move the appeal along, rather than waiting months to do a pre-hearing event and then decide that you needed something you haven't said for the last 4 months. Next slide. Another group of rules, 86 through 88, talks about mediation. So in this particular case, it's different because the board member that you see on, might not be on a call, going to be in person, is not evaluative. They're facilitative. Now, they won't be giving their opinion on what they think is true or right or wrong. They're going to be helping the parties discuss. And at a mediation, again, you need authority to bind with all the representatives there. People need to take part. And the board can order you to a mediation, which is very different than other types of law because a mediation, in theory, is supposed to be voluntary. Again, think of the purpose of the board. They are trying to make more touch points to move the appeal through the system. So at a mediation, again, confidential, without prejudice, you can have settlement offers you present at mediation that are no longer on the table once the mediation is done, and you can involve yourself in multiple mediations should the matter be moving forward. Pretty much said this, but again, mediation, although I think it's a great thing, there are very few rules around it. If you know anything, it's very few. We have bodies and organizations that kind of oversee mediators, but We need to build that mediation further and get people that are qualified to do it, so on and so forth. A lot of courts are moving towards this route. Just to give you a little bit of background, if you, those of you that have been reading the news, the ARB is under a broader umbrella of the Environmental Land Tribunal of Ontario, and that houses, I'm going to struggle here, the Assessment Review Board, Ontario Municipal Board, Conservation Land Authority, the Environmental Review Tribunal, and the Board of Negotiation. And that organization is being reviewed right now. They started with the OMB, and if anyone's read quite recently in the news, they've actually said that they're going to pretty much wipe the OMB out and give it less power. I won't get into the specifics, but a lot of times a city can pass a law saying they don't want a development. You can appeal a city's decision or a municipal decision to the OMB and they can grant it. Create a lot of issues for the city when you're trying to develop your neighborhood when another body keeps approving things in your municipality. Think of Toronto. All of those condos, they didn't get approved by the City of Toronto. They all went to OMB and they keep getting granted for higher and higher skyscrapers in Toronto. The ARB is very cognizant of that because they're arm's length away from the OMB. In fact, assessment matters used to be heard at the OMB. A lot of these rule changes are precipitating from the review that they're currently undergoing. So when you're looking at these crazy rules, think about that. You'd make crazy rules too. Next slide. To give you some background on numbers. These are numbers someone helped me pull, so I trust that they're correct. So out of 100 appeals, 100% of appeals, excuse me, we took a sample. 50% of the appeals were just withdrawn before hearing. So these are people that are rushing to a filing deadline to file an appeal, maybe getting some time to review later and realizing that they had no leg to stand on, or they thought so, they filed a statement of issues, MPAC responded, and they were like, okay, good on you, MPAC. Or AKA, those are under-assessed properties. 35% of appeals got minutes of settlement, so that is MPAC saying, you're right, sorry about that. When we correct the value, parties sign it, we move forward. I'll skip down and say 10% were administratively disposed of. This could be anything from an appeal was made in error, so it was canceled. That would be a statistic. They could have an administrative dismissal. You could have situations where a representative had a client, can't get a hold of them, they withdraw the representation, and that appeal just flutters for a bit until we realize it should be canceled or dismissed. So those are 10% of things. And the last 5% are things that go to court that you actually have a decision, either verbal or usually written decisions. So very small percentage of those 50,000 appeals that we're looking at right now will actually go to hearing, but there's a lot of work that goes into it to get it to that stage, or before that stage. So again, the board doesn't want to keep setting hearing dates that no one is adhering to, so they're trying to get parties more touch points and get them more into alternative dispute resolution meetings. Next slide. Just to help my municipal friends before we go into we're close to the professional stage now, my slides are formatted badly. Just wanted to go into a little bit about municipalities. There are two rules that really affect them. A lot of municipalities, based on resources, aren't involved in the entire appeal process because it's laborious. 50,000 appeals, a municipality like Toronto has a large percentage of them, 25% of those. They are not involved in every single discussion and settlement because they have a small tax assessment team. What it's actually saying here now, instead of municipalities coming in later and talking about a settlement they may not like, the board has said, if you don't file a response way up front in that long process, you lose your right to respond or object to any settlement. And let's say you put in a response, but you decide not to do anything because you kept your rights. Well, when we issue minutes of settlement and we send it to the municipality, they only have a limited time to sign those minutes or they've deemed to accept it. So really, really two rules that really are time sensitive and give a lot of pressure to municipalities. So we'll have to see how this plays out. There's a bit of a pushback in municipalities because again, all of what we're doing here, again, affects the taxpayer of course, but it really affects the municipality. Next slide, please. I won't talk much about this, but the board realized that these changes are significant, so they've made they've made a committee that is going to help them get through these changes. So it's made up of one municipal rep, 3 MPAC reps, and the board. We're adding more and more to this community. They're going to talk about all the hardships that the rules have caused as we go along. They're going to be responsible for doing a review of the rule changes. That's going to happen in about 1.5 years from now. They're also going to talk about scheduling to make sure that one municipality or one taxpayer isn't overburdened with a heavy schedule on their end, to try to split it out and make accommodations. So that consultation process is going to be reviewed thoroughly, and I think that provides some ease to some of the parties in the field. So again, this is just a high-level overview. We're trying to change behaviors. We're trying to be compliant. In doing so, we are trying to revolutionize the way we've given property taxpayers data and helping them formulate their own opinions. The thought is that it won't be counterproductive to what we do. The thought is that they will be more informed in order to make a better decision of whether they want to proceed with an appeal. And the thought would be, if you make that informed decision, maybe there's something there. So this is not about going to court with your disclosure behind your back and putting it forward. It's saying full disclosure, you know what we did, you know what your value is, you know what your neighborhood looks like. Do you have a point? And if you do, let us know, and maybe we'll have an agreement. So in terms of this, I'm going to get the professional piece right after, but I'll stop here for my online friends and for the people in the audience here. Are there any questions before I go into the professionalism piece? Lori.
How is this real estate boom affecting property
Good
assessment?
question. So someone asked me, I was in Ottawa 2 weeks ago, and someone asked me, Ottawa's a very different market than the GTA, and someone said, you take a snapshot in time, so right now in the current world, our snapshot is January 1st, 2016, that value that we put on those properties is going to be your value for the next 4 years, 17, 18, 19, 20. Well, things were looking pretty good in January 2016. In fact, things were looking good for all 2016. For those of you that have followed, my dear friend Kathleen Wynne, she made some recommendations that aren't unheard of because they did the same thing in BC. And if you've heard anything recently, the market slowed. Slowed is an understatement. It halted at this point in time. So I don't believe the values have gone down, but let's say that starts to happen. You have a very huge dilemma. Because in 2018, let's say your property starts going down in value. The test the board has before it is what was your property worth as of January 1st, 2016. So potentially, you could have a very high value at that point in time. And although your house may be decreasing, for example, you are in some hardships. Now there's a few other remedies that most homeowners don't even have the access to, but let's say you're an office building and you end up having vacancies. There are certain municipal tax apps that you can file to say that you have large vacancies and you can get some of that tax money back. But if you've read the news again, Ottawa just announced that they're canceling their vacancy program and it's going to trickle down to all the other municipalities, so you might not have that remedy either. So there's going to be a prevailing hush in the market because you may actually see some stagnant prices or lower prices, and the test is what it is, and those people are going to receive some hardships. And I can tell you this happened because if I go back to 2008 CVA, which was for taxation 9, 10, 11, 12, if anyone knows anything about commercial property, so it wasn't much about the res, but you had the Lehman Brothers crisis, if everyone knows about the States. I won't go into detail, but the market tanked a bit in September to October 2008 and carried through to 2009 and kind of picked back up in 2010. There were a lot of people that had appeals with me when I came 2011, 2012 that said, my property isn't worth this because of the market crash. The test is as of that date. So think of it theoretically. If MPAC had 5 million people to go out and see 5 million properties and they assessed every property and every property sold and they assessed every property on January 1st, 2016, what is your property worth? If it's worth less on January 2nd, 2016, that's not the test. It's a snapshot in time. You're welcome. Any other questions? Yes.
So what if you have like a tax roll number from someone, you look for 24 homes, and now you need more info before you even file anything? Can you get that info from the board, like to get more assessments from other properties?
So not the board, you get it from MPAC.
Right.
And again, we're gonna, this is a very politically correct comment, so let me tiptoe around this. We're not looking to ding a homeowner, right? So if, I don't know why the little old ladies always like the legal test, but if the little old lady needs more information from us, we're going to provide that information. But I think it's a different threshold professionally if I have a paralegal or a lawyer that just wants to take 24 homes and keep asking me for more homes and more homes. you have professional responsibility, which is a great segue into what I'm going to speak about, to know what you're talking about. And I'm telling you in this assessment, 24 properties is a large amount of properties. But if someone needed that, we would provide it. Any other questions? So I'm going to go into, well, no questions, I'm going to right into it because I know time is precious. It's a warm day today too, you guys probably want to go home. Right into a professionalism piece I want to speak about, and it's apropos to so many things, it's dealing with competence. So I'm going to segue into one little thing before I get into this. So competence is interesting because the big talk right now, and Lori is a plug for you, is the Markela reports, right? Family law and whether paralegals will get the limited scope with the family law. And there are two different varying opinions, I would say, on the educational piece and the implementation piece. And that is, some paralegals are saying, I have a duty to be competent, so any other type of law that opens up or gets involved in the paralegal scope, I do not need to do any further education because as a competent paralegal, I would seek those remedies and get educated through my own means before I actually represent someone. I'm not frivolous and I wouldn't do things that are outside of my scope of knowledge. There's another school of thought that says, you know what, if you look at some other types of law like immigration or maybe other things we'll get, it was an educational requirement that we went further to get other education to be able to involve yourself in another type of law. I won't go into what's right or wrong, but those are the schools of thought that I've heard. And I made my submission. I hope all of you out there made your submissions as well. But let's dig a bit deeper into that. In my submission, I can say this openly, I had alternative views, but I did reference property assessment. So one of the arguments I've heard is that lawyers, they don't necessarily have to take, and I don't know this for a fact, so don't quote me, they don't necessarily have to take family law. It could be an optional course for them, but they get out of law school and they can still practice in family. And we're looking at lawyers and saying, well, why don't we get to? I don't think that comparison should be made, but that's a school of thought, not my opinion. So someone brought it to me and said, well, property assessment, although lawyers do learn property rights and they go through a lot of legal property-related courses, property assessment is a niche field and you can get out, paralegals can too, and work in a niche field that you, for the most part, have not learned in your paralegal studies or your potentially law school. So how do you become competent in property assessment? So this is going to be more self-reflective of me and what I've done. So I came out of Durham College in the paralegal program, and I did not learn about property assessment. I knew about property through other means, and I got to MPAC and I said, okay, well, how do I become more competent? Well, I could have worked at MPAC and just learned what they told me and did what MPAC said to do. But I think that as paralegals, we have a higher degree, that we should be actually moving this along, moving our education along on our own. We should be taking our own self-study. So I'm speaking more about property assessment today, and I'm going to stick to this topic. I actually went and I joined the organization Institute of Municipal Assessors, and I did courses. And in order to get a designation, the first level of designation they have, it's an associate member of the Institute of Municipal Assessors, which I'm one of. And you involve yourself in 6 or 7 courses, I can't remember, that are theoretical, approach to value, mass appraisal, how to do sales investigations, how to assess residential homes, municipal land use planning, ethics within the assessment world. I won't go through all of them. And I had to take those courses, and I did self-study, one by one, and I became, in my opinion, competent by doing those courses, along with handling my day-to-day work at MPAC, reading on my own, doing CPD, and doing CPD, an advocate society, and so on and so forth. I think a big part of what we do and what we should be doing is always doing self-study and always getting up to speed with your type of law. To take a step sideways to family law, I can understand why people think that by virtue of, if we do get that scope of law, that they should be able to do their own self-study. I think it gives the community that has access to paralegals a little breath of fresh air, knowing that paralegals have understood that they have to go back and do some level of education in order to take on another type of law that they would not have learned in paralegal school, for example. So that's an opinion I have, of course, and I'm giving you my interpretation of it. Now, I hope you guys are going to kill me, but I'm going to ask quickly, are there questions online? Negative. Are there questions here about that? And I don't mind if you have a difference of opinion than me. I'm telling you a lot of opinions, so if anyone has a question here, let me know. I'll keep going. No? Good. So for those of you up here that are saying, well, you should be saying you want to work for MPAC, but for those of you saying, you know what, I can make a lifestyle out of being in property assessment, or I can add it to the things I'm currently practicing right now as something on the side. I'll go in a bit about how outside practices usually work. Typically speaking, a lot of the work done on the average property is done on contingency. So that's a little scary, but it makes sense. A taxpayer would only pay you, or you'd only get paid, should their property value decrease and result in a reduction and result in a refund in taxes from the municipality. So I think the range of those contingencies probably range from 20 to 30%. So if you get really large reductions, 30% is really good. If you're nibbling away at the bit, don't quit your day job. That being said, for those of you that want to join into this field, I'll tell you a bit about what you could do. I'll give you pros and cons of each. If you started somewhere at MPAC, and I can tell you that there are probably somewhere between 40 and 50% of the tax agents on the other side, so not lawyers, but paralegals, that started at MPAC and then went to the other side. The benefit of that is MPAC has everything at its fingertips. Every decision that comes out, there was an MPAC representative there, or external legal counsel. Win, lose, or draw, we have all the information. You've seen our databases that we provide to taxpayers. Well, you can only imagine that we have a lot of data within MPAC. MPAC does a lot of things. We give reports to organizations. We actually have, we do voters list. So all the information we collect from censuses, we have all the information. We give to municipalities so that they know how to send their census out in voters list. So it's a lot of data at your fingertips. So if you're going to learn this field, it would make great sense to start at somewhere like MPAC to learn the ins and outs. As a paralegal practicing within property assessment law, by virtue, usually when you're working on any other type of law, you might even be a generalist, but you know when you do cases, you must learn the type of law you're doing. So if anyone's done anything in small claims, you know you just don't show up and start arguing a small claims matter. You would have to research the statute, some of the rules and regulations around it, and then present your case. A lot of types of law I've noticed that paralegals are dabbling in, they can kind of stand there and do it on their own and do dual role kind of, and you know, they call witnesses, but they have a lot of legal arguments. Not that, you've seen some of the cases, not that some of our arguments at the ARB are very legal, but a lot of reliance that I have when I go to court is with my witnesses. So the good thing about working at MPAC is that you have direct knowledge with what I would consider some of the most expert people in the province. Some people working at MPAC for 30, 35 years, doing one type of property. It's very difficult when you're starting on the outside to get that same knowledge that I would have getting up from my desk and walking over to someone and asking them about the CN Tower or Pearson Airport. You probably won't find that knowledge very easy when you're out in the field. So that's another pro of working at MPAC, is just access to data. Another pro in just in general is that MPAC we sever off different functions. So we have a valuation department, we have a legal department in terms of advocacy, we have a legal department that does legislation, interpretation requests, so on and so forth. You have access to people that do a fraction of property assessment, so you get experts in different pieces of assessment. That also is very helpful when you start at MPAC. Now I can talk about cons, and the inverse is going to be for external people. Potentially, some of the cons you could say is that your salary at MPAC, although I think it's very healthy, you're limited, obviously, and when you're on the outside and you have clients, it's virtually limitless, right? You can get many more clients, and if you're successful at what you do, you can make probably a lot more money. That's one con of working at MPAC, is that you wouldn't have access to that. Another thing, just by virtue of an organization like MPAC, you can imagine, like any other organization out there, maybe you start, for example, in my department and you're a junior. Well, sometimes you may be waiting out someone else to become a senior paralegal. By virtue of what we do, and my team is a little different because I give people opportunities, but maybe you work in an area where you're only working on one property type and you don't get to venture off into other property types. So for example, you're on my team, a really bad manager, and I say you have to do multi-residential buildings. And your real love is in industrial properties. Well, if my need is in that type of property, that's what you work on. As opposed to being on the outside, you can have clients in any field you want, and you can work on any property you want. It's another con, another pro or con for MPAC. Another con for being external, pro for MPAC, would be MPAC does pay for a lot of your training. So we have, again, experts within our company that will get you trained up to speed. And we have formalized departments that just do learning and development. That's just what they do, and they're pumping out educational courses for us. When you're on the outside, not that you can't get trained, I'm not suggesting that at all, but it might cost you a little more. And you may or may not get experts within the field. Right? Come to Durham College, some guy standing here talking about assessment, you don't know if I'm an expert or not. You just have to listen to me, and now you got 3 hours. When you're at MPAC, you likely have people who are experts in the field that teach you because, again, just by makeup of the organization. So another way to become competent, going back to that point, is when you start at MPAC, you have access to these things. Flipping, I'm going back and forth, flipping to the outside only, there are many organizations for lawyers and paralegals, some separate and some actually join lawyers and paralegals, that you can go to and get very up to speed. So lawyers, for example, you have, it's ACAC, I don't remember the name of the acronyms, but that's for people in assessment and counsel. Only speaking to counsel, that's lawyers. Coming up in June 18th to June 20th, you have the Institute of Municipal Assessors Conference coming up. Once a year in June, we have this huge conference anyone can go to, but usually it's members of the IMA, and they discuss various things, such as unique things like how to value shopping centers, how to value golf courses. We talk about the latest case law that came out in the last year. You get to obviously connect and liaise with the people in your field, take business cards, get up to speed with that. So there are other ways you can, on the external side, you can get to those same organizations and same training that people in MPAC would be in. You can involve yourself on different boards to be chairs of boards, for example. So all these organizations I'm talking about, even the IAAO that I talked about in the US, they now have a Canadian chapter. You can involve yourselves in those committees. It's a selfless thing to do because you don't get paid to do it, but you can actually be a part of the forefront of promoting assessment outside to all the players and all the jurisdictions around the world. Going back and forth, talking about MPAC a little more. Another benefit of working at MPAC, and this one's near and dear to my heart because I followed it for a long time. MPAC now, it's very revolutionary, and I know I'm plugging it over and over, but I'll tell you a few stories. We are getting contacted by people in other parts of the world asking for us to build out their assessment model. You can imagine in Ontario, the biggest source of income is through property taxes. Second might be property tax, parking tickets, sorry. But property assessment is a huge part of municipal resources. And MPAC's model has been refined over and over again. We've actually moved all our databases to the cloud, almost all our databases, to the cloud. So we're running on very, very, very small space to do a large model. It used to take us a couple of weeks to value every property. We used to shut down all our systems for like 3 weeks, and we'd do a mass valuation of all the province, and you couldn't touch any system because if you did, it could screw it up, and then we'd have all the values. We now run property values in Ontario in 7 seconds, just from being in the cloud, and that happened within 4 years. We went to conferences in places in the States, and people are begging for our proprietary systems. Jamaica, Guyana, India are all asking for us to help build out their systems, even at a very small, minute level, so that they can generate taxes. A big part, and if lawyers are here today, land rights are a huge thing, and they need to build out their system for land rights. I'll tell you another quick story. That's a great story. I don't remember the exact name of the place, but there's a place in Ontario that, through some decree, they found out that wasn't given over to Canada. So it's a native community, and they found out that the treaty, this piece of land, wasn't actually surrendered to the government of Canada. So it actually exists on its own, and when that happens, you can imagine Canada is not really servicing them fully because you're actually a country within a country, and you are on your own. MPAC went there, and it built out the property assessment jurisdiction for that native land community. It went in there, it actually created building permits, picked up all the data of people's homes. We talked to the people there, and we found out some of the things that lead to better or worse values. And we actually provided a system that they now use that helps them generate their own taxes. They develop it, and we're in and out within a year. And we've got, without going into detail, they are very happy because they now can be self-sustainable because they now generate income that everyone's paying. So I know I'm getting off topic here, but in terms of like a pro for MPAC, you're actually involved in those kind of revolutionary changes that otherwise on the external side you might not be involved in. And I think those people, it wasn't myself, but those people that took part in it, that's all they ever speak about these days. So competence in that sense is that you can actually, not competence in a professional sense, but in terms of just having a broader social goal of what you want to see when you close your eyes at night. I think that's kind of special, in my opinion. So working at MPAC Pro, to be competent, you can be involved in all these things that give you a greater knowledge and a greater perspective on property assessment, property tax, and people's lives. On the external side, I can tell you that if someone said they got affected in a positive way, MPAC versus a representative, they would say the positive way is the representative, MPAC's the negative. We're taxing you, we're putting a value on your home. So I think on the external side, one of the positives I would say is that you're probably getting a big thanks when you get someone a large reduction on their property. So I think that's also fulfilling if you're on that side, that you can get that from a taxpayer. Speaking very briefly, again, no questions right now, very briefly on confidence, one of the last things I'll say is that, it's a segue into my closings, things like these. I've done my first part of my accreditation for AIMA, and I've been pretty successful, if I could say so myself, at the board, but it doesn't stop there. Continued professional development helps your competence. Things change all the time. I just took you through about 30 slides of rule changes. I talked to some people in the community just last week, and they were like, I didn't know there were rule changes. So if you're not doing professional development all the time, then you're not going to be competent. And that's, I told you about the AMAC committee that they're going to meet in a year from now and see if it's working, and they'll implement other practice directions. You will need to do professional development to stay competent, because when things change, you have to be in the know. So the last thing I'll say about competence is make sure that after you've achieved what you think you've achieved, keep going out there and getting more and more education. Save up some money off each check or off each settlement, and store it away so that when these things come up, you can actually pay for them and attend them, and have a buddy system and share notes. So if you can't go to a CPD, maybe someone that you know went, and although you don't get the credit for it, you can have the notes and you have the knowledge. And with that, and if there's no other questions, I think I'm going to be done.
Okay, any questions? I have one more.
Sure.
What are the strengths and weaknesses that you see in representatives in private practice on the board?
The strengths and weaknesses of representatives? Okay. This is fun. So.
No names.
No, and I can't even say companies right now. Let me just think. So I can tell you a few, because this happens all the time, because my team is a part of every appeal, or most appeals, excuse me. I'll start with the weaknesses, because those are always fun. It's the I'm going to say Perry Mason, but that would even date me, because I don't even know about Perry Mason. But it's these types that think they know what a lawyer should do or a paralegal should do. They're usually so off-base. We're at an administrative tribunal. Depending on your municipality, you are sitting at a table. You don't even have a lectern with a witness box. Toronto you do, but some other areas you don't. You're not coming in here with guns a-blazing. So those kinds of lawyers and paralegals, they don't have much respect within my organization. They don't have respect within the external legal counsel or legal representative organizations, and they do not have respect with the board. You can tell instantly. So I would say leave that stuff for your mirror inside your washroom, but don't bring it to the board. That's the first thing. Number two, I think it's people that actually take on too much work. And that's a matter of circumstance. You have too many clients, the scheduling is really rough. You can see when someone's coming in there and they're a little more flustered and they're not prepared. Preparedness is the most important thing. If you do nothing else, I can make up a closing on the fly or an opening, I can walk you through questioning, but I gotta know my case better. I strive to know my case better than anyone else in the room. And if I have that, I can get through any tough case. So preparedness is another big one I would say is the weakness of people that come to the ARB. If it was not those two, it would just be general candor. You'd be surprised how small communities are, even if it's small claims, which I think is a larger one, or POA. The PP work with the municipalities are actually pretty small. The assessment community, being a niche market, it's very small. So some people aren't very nice to other people. This is not, the great thing about working at MPAC is that it's not my money. And I say that, I don't mean to be a joke, but I am not trying to not give someone a recommendation on value, because it doesn't matter to me if they get it or not. At the same time, I'm a paralegal, and I have duties and responsibilities to make sure that I'm not giving it away frivolously. But I think inside MPAC and outside, it ends up being this battle, like it's our money. It's like kind of being at McDonald's, you want sweet and sour sauce, they don't give it to you. It's not your sweet and sour sauce. Just give the sweet and sour sauce away, right? So I feel like it's the same thing in assessment. You have to understand that the great thing about it is, in other types of law, you might be a little more serious about criminal law, even in landlord-tenant, if someone's losing their home. But in assessment, notwithstanding the municipality and what they need us to do, we should be able to go to sleep at night, confident that we haven't eroded the tax base, but you're not angry. It's a value, it's property assessment. So I think some people take it a little too seriously, and they're not nice enough. Friendly comments go a long way, that's all I can say. In terms of strengths, what I've seen is that, the last comment I'll make, and this is a very, very small percentage of people, and it usually happens from lawyers or paralegals that are outside the body of law. So a lawyer that does whatever type of criminal law, and they're doing a property tax assessment appeal, they might go against a paralegal, and paralegals dominate assessment world, right? They're way more paralegals than lawyers. They may come in there thinking, well, I'm against a lowly paralegal, I'm going to crush you. But in fact, some of the paralegals in the community are some of the best advocates and evaluators in assessment. So I think some people should be very careful when you're coming into this type of law. You should probably know who you're going against first. But going towards strengths, preparedness, I'm going to do the inverse almost, but preparedness is a huge one. Another thing is negotiation skills. You'll get so much more from negotiation. When you go to the board, like in any other type of law, when you go to the board, it's not in your hands. And a lot of times, both parties are going to win or lose, depending on how you look at it. If you are learning how to negotiate, you'll actually be much more efficient. You can probably take on more properties if you learn how to negotiate better, because if you're going to hearing every day, of course you're not going to be prepared because you can't handle the workload. If you can negotiate, I've been in mediations where we have a list of properties and we can get through 8 of them. If I do a full hearing, I've done 3-day full hearings. So from cost-benefit analysis, even clothing, I can go to the board, have a mediation in my one suit that I have, and I can get through 8 properties. If I go to court for 8 properties and it takes me 16 days, you're going to eventually know that I have one suit. But there's that lack of skills in the community. A lot of people think, and this is another thing, a lot of people think negotiation is, I'm not going to give you my true start point now. I know that's what we learned in school. I'm going to hold it back to see where I can get you. I'm telling you right now, the best thing to do is come in with a very, maybe not your exact value, but a very good value. You'll get much more out of it. Once you start playing the game that you're going to go to a far end, and the other side does that, and the municipality comes and does that, you're not going to gain much traction. If you're known as someone that's forthright, and even on my side, when I deal with agents, when I come in with a value, a lot of times they know, if Drew is saying this, that's probably what it is. Unless I have a really good point, I'll squeeze them a little more. But other than that, Drew doesn't like to waste time. I have too much work on my plate. I don't want to play this game with you. That goes so far. And you'll actually be more efficient because when I come and say, you know, there's no value movement here, the property gets withdrawn. And as you saw by numbers, there's 50% withdrawals. So let's not play the game on the 50% of appeals. Let's start talking about the 50% of appeals that maybe there's something there that we can get to. So fairness, negotiation, and I would go back to saying not necessarily kindness, but respect. So when you go to the tribunal, understand what the member is called. They are not your honor. You will look very silly that way. They are member whoever or chair whoever. You can go to Mr. or Mrs. whoever too. They have nameplates. But understand what the chair is called. That's a part of preparedness. And respect your surroundings. So I've seen some paralegals that want to talk over chairs and members of the board. That would work with maybe a few handful of members that aren't very strong, but the strong members will politely put you in your place. And if you do that at the outset of a hearing, I'm already 50% of the way there between beating you in this case, because we're humans, just like the board members you see and judges that you guys see your day-to-day lives, and they know who they do not like as much as other people they like a little bit more. So I would say another part is respect. No questions online, no questions here. Oh, wait,
I know
Sarah?
you don't run the courses for the IMA, but do you know if there's prerequisites for them? Like, do you have to have your B1 already to take those courses?
Good question, and Sarah just bought you guys another 5 minutes of me speaking. I forgot one thing I was going to say. So let's answer that question and go to one thing really quick that I can do it fast. That the IMA, there is no prerequisite. They wanted to change it recently, but you do not have to have a P1 for sure. I think they want to change it so that you had to have post-secondary education of some sort. At first that wasn't there, but I think when we revolutionized IMA, we said post-secondary education to get people a little more mature. That's all it is, a maturity level. So no, anyone can do them and you can start whenever you want. The courses range from, sorry to say, $300 to $600. Put in perspective, per course, that's pretty much what you're paying at college. So think of it like that. So they range. You have a question? Absolutely.
Are the courses offered like in a certain location, like a classroom setting, or are they offered online?
Wait, there's more. That's why she bought you 5 more minutes. So at the IMA, they're correspondence. So you get your course, they mail you books, huge binders, and throughout it, you get a marker, usually someone that works at Impact truthfully, and you go through modules, and you mail or send electronically your test, and there's, say, for example, there's 10 modules, there's a midterm and a final. The final, you have to go write somewhere, and once you pass that course, you get a certificate of completion, and you go through them. Once you pass the first set of courses, you get the AIMA. There's another set of courses that gives you an MIMA, which is a member of the institute. I don't know what it's called. But you get another designation. But what I want to talk about was I forgot to tell you guys that I could talk about assessment forever because I love it. You guys would go to sleep by then. However, there is a program offered at Seneca. It was offered at St. Lawrence College too, but I don't think it is any longer. But Seneca has the Real Property Administration course, or PA course. And that's where a lot of the assessment world comes from. And unfortunately, a lot of other schools don't have it. Maybe some schools should think about buying the program from Seneca because those people have 100% success rate at getting jobs out of school. The graduates are a handful of them every semester, maybe 20 or so, and Impact takes them, or they go to an external firm, or they go to like the banks and different things like that to assess properties or appraise properties. But that is where the nuts and bolts come from out of that program. So that is a, generally speaking, a 2-year program at Seneca. If you have a post-secondary education, I don't know the requirements, but you can do it in 1-year fast track, much like paralegal programs are offered. And once you get out of that program, just by virtue of doing it, you automatically have your AIMA designation, and you are 1 or 2 courses away from having your MIMA designation, so the higher one. So for example, I have my AIMA, I have to do 8 more courses to get the other one. You're much further ahead after that course, albeit you're paying for it. So again, that's right out of high school, or the fast track one, you need a post-secondary education. And that takes you through much more well-rounded level of courses, of course the gen eds as well. And for that program, going back to the question here, that's offered in class. And that's an awesome course to take too, because we have people at MPAC that teach in that program, and you have people on the external world from other firms that come in and teach part-time as well. So you're actually getting professors in the school that know what they're doing, and you're getting an outside experience from other organizations that are giving you their slant and their knowledge as well. So it's the only course that is offered that does what it does, so obviously it's highly recommended. And again, I told you, for those of you who are thinking about it online, 100% rate of success getting a job in your field, which is a lot of programs cannot say that. I did it in 3 minutes, it's not too bad.
I'd like to thank all the people that were here in person and all the people via webcast, and I will repeat, there will be a confirmation of attendance sent. I don't know what the new format will be, but we will be sending them out once we receive our confirmations of logins for those people online and obviously those people here who've signed in. I'd like to thank you very much for sharing your knowledge. Anyone who has questions for the midnight tonight deadline for the job application?
Yes, there are 5 postings out there, Mississauga, Durham, Richmond Hill, and 2 in Toronto for senior paralegal. And it was out for 2 weeks, so I'm sure you guys were much busier doing other things, but it closes at midnight tonight.
And last but not least, Lon Appleby and the Resolve team that provides our webcasts and everything else, our technical support, they're absolutely amazing.
Thank you very much.
So. And we're finished. Anyone who wants to go to St. Louis, let me know. Okay. Also, the student committee who deserves a really big thank you also, we need to meet with you. So if you're going to